Hey there, tonight we're diving into the history of Martin Luther King Jr. Day in America, where the truth is, even the calendar had to take a stand before it could become a national holiday. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. If you want to talk about someone who shook the foundations of America without ever lifting a fist, let's chat about Martin Luther King Jr. This guy was no ordinary preacher shouting from the pulpit. He was the kind of person who could move mountains with a microphone and a dream, not exactly your typical Sunday sermon material. From the Montgomery bus boycott to the March on Washington, he transformed the civil rights movement into a force of nature that even Mother Nature would envy. First, let's get one thing straight. MLK wasn't just about that one speech where he talked about dreams. Sure, I Have a Dream is legendary, but if that's all you know about him, it's like saying the Beatles only sang Hey Jude. The guy was a revolutionary, not just a dreamer. Born on January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia, King was a smart cookie from the start, skipping grades and heading off to college at 15. He earned a Ph.D. in systematic theology from Boston University by 1955, which, let's be honest, is no small feat. While some were trying to figure out how to make ramen in the dorm microwave, MLK was tackling existential questions. Now, about that civil rights business. King first stepped into the spotlight during the Montgomery bus boycott. It was 1955, and Rosa Parks had just made her famous stand by sitting down. A 26-year-old King was chosen to lead the Montgomery Improvement Association. Little did anyone know, this was more than a local bus fare dispute. This was the spark that ignited a nationwide movement. The boycott lasted 381 days, long enough to make even the most dedicated commuter cringe, and ended with the Supreme Court ruling that segregation on public buses was unconstitutional. King had successfully driven segregation out of the driver's seat, and he did it all while dressed in a suit that could make James Bond jealous. King's philosophy was one of non-violent resistance, a strategy that he adopted after being inspired by Mahatma Gandhi. This wasn't just about turning the other cheek, it was about turning the tide. In the Deep South, where racist policies were as common as sweet tea, non-violence was both a daring and dangerous approach. When King led the Birmingham campaign in 1963, he faced police brutality that was broadcast across the nation, which, in the age before viral videos, was a pretty big deal. The sight of peaceful protesters being attacked by dogs and blasted with fire hoses was enough to shock a country out of complacency. But let's not gloss over the fact that MLK wasn't universally adored during his lifetime. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, was not his biggest fan. In fact, Hoover considered King the most dangerous Negro in the future of this nation. That's right, the man who preached peace was seen as a threat. The FBI tapped his phones, bugged his hotel rooms, and sent him anonymous letters urging him to, well, stop breathing. The government's obsession with King was less about national security and more about preserving the status quo. It's a wild world when the protector of law and order is more interested in silencing a preacher than catching bank robbers. In 1963, King delivered his iconic I Have a Dream speech during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. It was August 28, and over 250,000 people gathered at the Lincoln Memorial. They came by bus, by car, by foot, even hitchhiking their way to stand shoulder to shoulder in the sweltering heat. King's words soared across the crowd and seeped into the consciousness of a nation. I have a dream, he declared, and delivered a vision of equality that still echoes today. But as much as we love the dream, let's not forget the reality MLK faced. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were monumental achievements, yet they didn't magically erase racism. King turned his attention to economic justice, realizing that the fight for civil rights was tightly intertwined with the fight against poverty. The Poor People's Campaign aimed to unite people of different races for a common cause. Unfortunately, economic justice wasn't as photogenic as marches and speeches, and it faced significant resistance. Here's where the story takes a darker turn. By 1968, King was planning the Poor People's March on Washington, but his journey was cut short. On April 4, he was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, at the Lorraine Motel. He was there to support striking sanitation workers who demanded better wages and working conditions, a stark reminder that his fight was always about more than just dreams. King's death was a national tragedy that left a void in the civil rights movement. It sparked riots in over 100 cities, a testament to the deep-seated anger and frustration across the country. But even in death, King's legacy lived on. His teachings and strategies continued to inspire movements for justice and equality around the world. So, why did MLK matter? Because he saw the world not just as it was, but as it could be. He challenged us to dream bigger, to act nobler, and to resist with dignity. He showed us that true power lies not in the strength of our fists, but in the strength of our convictions. And if that doesn't make him a big deal, I don't know what does. And so, after King's untimely departure, his legacy lingered like the aroma of a fine southern barbecue, rich, complex, and slightly fiery. The nation was left grappling with how to honor a man who had changed the course of history without ever picking up a weapon. Enter the idea of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, a proposal that quickly turned into a political hot potato harder than a jalapeno at a Texan barbecue. The idea seemed simple enough. Celebrate a man who championed equality and justice. But oh boy, the road to making this dream a reality was anything but smooth. The first proposal for a national holiday came in the immediate aftermath of King's assassination in 1968. Congressman John Conyers, a Democrat from Michigan, introduced a bill to honor King with a federal holiday. But Congress, being Congress, was about as quick to act as a tortoise in a triathlon. You see, creating a new federal holiday isn't as straightforward as adding a date to your Google Calendar. It comes with a price tag, and for some folks in power, that was a cost too high for comfort. Critics of the holiday threw around all sorts of colorful reasons for saying no. Some feared the economic impact of a day off work, claiming it would cost billions. Others, let's be honest, were just not that into the idea of celebrating a civil rights leader. And then there were those who worried about setting a precedent. Because, apparently, once you start celebrating people who fought for justice, who knows where it might end? Let's talk numbers. Back in the early 1980s, it was estimated that a new federal holiday would cost the U.S. economy about $18 million in lost productivity. To put that in perspective, that's like every American losing about 7 cents each. But if you ask some lawmakers, you'd think they were being asked to part with their life savings. Of course, the economic argument was a convenient cover for deeper, less savory reasons for opposition. Some opponents, like Senator Jesse Helms, went as far as to question King's character, dredging up FBI reports filled with half-truths and outright lies. Helms seemed to forget that the FBI wasn't exactly the most reliable narrator when it came to King. Remember, this was the same agency that saw him as a threat to national security. But fear not, because here comes the cavalry, or rather the musicians. Enter Stevie Wonder, a man whose harmonica could probably solve world peace if given the chance. In 1980, Stevie released the song Happy Birthday, not just as a catchy tune to croon at parties, but as a protest anthem pushing for a national holiday to honor King. The song wasn't just a hit, it was a rallying cry. Stevie Wonder wasn't just singing into the wind, he was orchestrating a symphony of change. Wonder's musical intervention was more than just a foot-tapper, it was the soundtrack to a movement. He organized the Rally for Peace in Washington, D.C., drawing over 100,000 people to the National Mall, a crowd size that would make any political campaign manager swoon. This was grassroots activism with a beat, and it was hard to ignore. Suddenly, the idea of a holiday had a melody, a rhythm, and a whole lot of soul. Despite these efforts, it wasn't until 1983 that the political winds began to shift. President Ronald Reagan, who wasn't exactly known for his progressive stances on civil rights, signed the bill to make Martin Luther King Jr. Day a federal holiday. He did so with a smile, but not without reservations. Behind closed doors, Reagan expressed concerns about King's alleged communist ties, allegations that were about as grounded in reality as a plot from a Cold War spy novel. Finally, on November 2, 1983, the holiday was signed into law, set to be observed on the third Monday of January each year. But even this victory was a bit of a bitter pill. Some states dragged their feet in recognizing the holiday, with resistance as pervasive as a southern heatwave. Arizona, for instance, didn't officially recognize MLK Day until 1992, after a public outcry and a boycott that cost the state an estimated $500 million in lost tourism revenue. Talk about learning the hard way. The fight for MLK Day wasn't just about honoring a man. It was a battle over what America stands for. It was a tug-of-war between progress and tradition, between acknowledging uncomfortable truths and clinging to a sanitized version of history. The holiday forced the nation to confront its past and, hopefully, to build a future that lived up to King's dream. In the end, Martin Luther King Jr. Day became more than just a day off work. It became a day of reflection and action. It serves as a reminder that the march toward justice is ongoing, and that sometimes the most powerful tools in that fight are words, dreams, and yes, even songs. As we move forward, the challenge remains to keep the spirit of King's dream alive, to use our voices to speak out against injustice, and to remember that while the road may be long, it bends toward justice. One step, one note, one dream at a time. And so, with a holiday secured on paper, the real circus began, getting everyone to actually observe it. You'd think passing a law would be the finish line, but in this case, it was more like the starting gun for a marathon of arm-twisting and political maneuvering. It was the 1980, a decade known for its big hair, bigger shoulder pads, and even bigger political egos, the legislative roller coaster that finally got Martin Luther King Jr. Day over the line proved that sometimes politics is less about ideas and more about who can outbluff whom. Let's dive into the drama, shall we? Picture a stage where the main actors are a mix of idealists, pragmatists, and a few who seem to have stumbled onto the wrong set altogether. The bill to establish MLK Day was first introduced in 1968, right after King's assassination, but it languished like a forgotten houseplant. Into the 1980, a time of economic upheaval where everything was up for negotiation, including the very fabric of American values. The push for the holiday was less about who shouted the loudest and more about who could navigate the political labyrinth without getting lost or eaten by a minotaur of bureaucracy. For a moment, let's talk numbers and logistics, the less glamorous side of history, but crucial nonetheless. Creating a federal holiday isn't just about printing Happy MLK Day on a calendar. It's about economics, like a $18 million price tag in lost productivity. To some, that was a small price for progress. To others, it was a national emergency. What they didn't tell you was that these economic arguments often masked deeper issues. To some, real cost wasn't dollars and cents, but the uncomfortable confrontation with the nation's racial past. Enter the political gymnastics of the 1980, where deals were brokered in smoke-filled rooms that would make a poker night look like child's play. President Ronald Reagan, a conservative icon not exactly known for his civil rights credentials, was a key player in this drama. Publicly, Reagan signed the bill into law with a smile, but behind closed doors, he expressed doubts about King's legacy, citing unfounded allegations of communist ties. This was a time when the word communist could make or break a career faster than you could say McCarthy. But hey, what's a little ideological bickering among friends? The real action was in the legislative haggling that would make a Wall Street trader blush. To get the bill over the line, proponents had to engage in the kind of horse trading that had less to do with morality and more with political expediency. It was a bipartisan chess game, with each side trying to checkmate the other while keeping an eye on the clock and the next election cycle. One of the most colorful opponents was none other than Senator Jesse Helms from North Carolina. He wasn't just opposed to MLK Day. He seemed to be on a personal crusade against it. Helms took to the Senate floor with a folder full of FBI reports that were as dubious as they were dramatic. He questioned King's character, painting him as a dangerous radical. It was political theater at its peak, but it was also a stark reminder of how entrenched resistance to change could be. As the debate raged on, the myth that the holiday's passage was a smooth ride began to crumble. If you thought MLK Day was universally embraced from the get-go, think again. It took a coalition of activists, musicians, and politicians working tirelessly to push the dream forward. Stevie Wonder, for instance, wasn't just a musical genius. He was a strategic mastermind who understood the power of a good tune and a great protest. The road to recognizing MLK Day was littered with roadblocks that required more than a catchy song to overcome. There were threats of vetoes, last-minute amendments, and even attempts to replace the holiday with alternatives that would have made MLK himself raise an eyebrow. Some proposed a National Civil Rights Day, which sounds nice in theory, but would have diluted King's specific contributions. But let's not forget the states, those stubborn entities that remind us that America isn't just a melting pot, it's a pressure cooker. Some states were slower to the party than others, with resistance as thick as southern molasses. Arizona, for instance, took almost a decade to make MLK Day official. It wasn't until a boycott that threatened $500 million in lost tourism revenue that they came around. Money talks, and in this case, it spoke louder than any moral argument could. Yet even as the holiday became official, the myth persisted that it was all smooth sailing. In reality, the journey to MLK Day was a microcosm of the broader civil rights struggle, fraught with obstacles, but ultimately a testament to perseverance. The holiday forced the nation to confront its past, warts and all, and to ask what it truly valued. Was it tradition, or was it the dream of a more just society? In the end, Martin Luther King Jr. Day became more than just a day off. It became a symbol of the ongoing fight for equality. It serves as a reminder that while the road to justice is long, it's also paved with the efforts of countless individuals who refuse to take no for an answer. As we move forward, the challenge remains to honor that legacy not just in words, but in actions that would make MLK proud. And if that means dancing to Stevie Wonder's Happy Birthday, while reflecting on the power of dreams and determination, well, that's a pretty good place to start. So, with MLK Day now firmly inked into federal law, you'd think the rest of the nation would fall in line like ducks after their mama. But no, the states decided to take their sweet time as if they were contemplating a wine pairing, not a national holiday. Welcome to the state-by-state rollout of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, a saga of stubbornness that rivals anything out of ancient Greek drama, minus the togas. Let's start with Arizona, the state that decided to put the A in annoyingly resistant. Picture this. It's the late 80s, and Arizona's reluctance to recognize MLK Day becomes a hot topic, literally and figuratively. The state initially opted out, citing economic concerns, because apparently the specter of lost productivity was scarier than a cactus in a snowstorm. But the real wake-up call came when the NFL, that bastion of moral authority, decided to yank the 1993 Super Bowl out of Arizona like a rabbit from a magician's hat. Talk about a fumble. The move was estimated to cost Arizona around $500 million in tourism revenue, a figure that could make even the most hardened skeptic break into a sweat. But it wasn't just the loss of sports glory that turned the tide. The state faced a boycott that was like a slow, steady drumbeat of financial woe. Celebrities and civil rights activists rallied against Arizona's decision, and it became a national embarrassment. Finally, in 1992, the voters of Arizona came to their senses and approved MLK Day. It was a classic case of economics trumping ideology, proving once again that money talks louder than any moral argument. Next, let's head to New Hampshire, which took a more circuitous route to acknowledging MLK Day. The Granite State, known for its motto, "Live free or die," seemed to take the latter part a bit too seriously when it came to adopting the holiday. Initially, they sidestepped the issue by celebrating Civil Rights Day instead. It was a linguistic loophole that allowed them to acknowledge civil rights without directly honoring King. It's a bit like throwing a birthday party for someone and forgetting to invite them. This semantic dance continued until the year 2000, when New Hampshire finally decided that it was time to call a spade, or in this case, a holiday a holiday. They switched from Civil Rights Day to Martin Luther King Jr. Day, joining the rest of the Union in full recognition of King's legacy. It was a move that, while delayed, was ultimately celebrated as a long overdue nod to the man who had given so much to the cause of justice. Now, even with these holdouts. It's worth noting that the resistance to MLK Day wasn't just about state pride or economic concerns. It was also a reflection of the uncomfortable truths that King's legacy forced Americans to confront. By acknowledging him, states were also acknowledging a history of racial injustice, a history that some were more than happy to forget. The holiday became a litmus test for where states stood on matters of race and equality, and not everyone was eager to take that test. Meanwhile, the rollout of MLK Day saw its share of creative excuses that could fill a comedy sketch. Some lawmakers worried about the precedent it would set, as if honoring a civil rights leader would open the floodgates to holidays for every activist with a cause. Others clung to economic arguments like a life raft, ignoring the fact that, in the grand scheme of things, the cost of a holiday was a drop in the national bucket. And then there were those who simply didn't like the idea of change, because if there's one thing history has taught us, it's that change is about as welcome as a porcupine at a balloon convention. Despite these hurdles, the push for MLK Day persisted, fueled by a coalition of activists, politicians, and everyday citizens who refused to let the dream die. The holiday became more than just a day off. It was a symbol of the ongoing struggle for equality and justice. It reminded Americans that the fight for civil rights wasn't a relic of the past, but a living, breathing movement that demanded action. By the time the new millennium rolled around, all 50 states had finally recognized MLK Day, a testament to both the power of persistence and the inevitability of progress. The journey was fraught with resistance, but it also highlighted the resilience of those who believed in King's dream, showed that while the path to justice might be long and winding, it's a path worth taking, even if you have to drag a few states kicking and screaming along the way. As we look back on the state-by-state rollout of MLK Day, it's tempting to see it as a tale of triumph over adversity. But let's not forget the lessons it taught us about the nature of progress. Change is rarely neat or orderly. It's messy, complicated, and often frustrating. It requires patience, persistence, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Yet, despite the obstacles, progress is possible. And that's a message that resonates just as strongly today as it did when King first articulated his dream. In the end, Martin Luther King Jr. Day is a reminder of what we can achieve when we refuse to accept the status quo. It's a celebration of a man who dared to dream of a better world, and a call to action for those of us who continue to strive for justice. As we move forward, let's carry King's legacy with us, using it as a guiding light as we navigate the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. After all, the road to justice is long, but it's a road worth traveling. And with each step, we're getting closer to that dream, a dream that, with a little luck and a lot of determination, might just become a reality. And now, as the dust settles on the saga of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, we're left with a national holiday that's as much a reflection of our aspirations as our imperfections. So, what does MLK Day mean today? Is it a heartfelt tribute to a man who changed the world, or just an excuse to sleep in on a January Monday? Spoiler alert. It's complicated, like trying to explain a plot twist in a Christopher Nolan film. Let's start with the numbers, because nothing says serious analysis like cold, hard data. As of recent counts, about 60% of employers give their workers MLK Day off, which means a significant chunk of folks are still clocking in on a day meant to honor a man who dreamed of a fairer world. It's a bit like throwing a birthday party and forgetting to invite the guest of honor. On the flip side, many schools, community organizations, and even some businesses use the day for service projects, turning King's legacy into action. It's a practice that aligns with the idea of a day on, not a day off, and it's a fitting tribute to a man who believed in rolling up his sleeves and getting things done. In some communities, MLK Day is celebrated with parades, speeches, and lots of we shall overcome renditions that would make even the most stoic tear up. In others, it passes with a whisper, a day like any other. The disparity speaks volumes about how King's legacy is perceived across the nation. In cities like Atlanta, King's birthplace, the holiday is a major event, with commemorative services at the Ebenezer Baptist Church and tours of the King Center. Meanwhile, in areas less steeped in civil rights history, the day might slip by unremarked, a silent testimony to the uneven distribution of King's dream. The irony here is as thick as a Southern accent. A holiday meant to unify can sometimes highlight divisions, but it's also a day that prompts reflection on the progress we've made and the journey still ahead. King's dream of racial equality is still a work in progress, and MLK Day serves as an annual reminder of the unfinished business on America's to-do list. It's a day for taking stock, for asking ourselves how far we've come and how far we have yet to go. The legacy of King himself. Now, that's a subject that can fill libraries. King's philosophy of nonviolence and his vision of a beloved community remain powerful and evocative. Yet let's not sugarcoat it. King's message was, and still is, challenging. It's easy to romanticize his speeches and marches, to embrace the dream without confronting the uncomfortable truths he laid bare. King wasn't just calling for racial harmony. He was demanding justice, economic equality, and an overhaul of a system that was, and often still is, stacked against the marginalized. Today's world is still grappling with issues King championed. Economic inequality, check. Racial discrimination, unfortunately, still a thing. Voting rights. Well, let's just say the debate is far from over. In this light, MLK Day isn't just a nod to the past. It's a call to action for the present. It's a reminder that while we've come a long way since the 1960s, King's dream requires more than just ceremonial gestures to become reality. But before you despair, let's remember the power of a good myth. King's story is one that inspires because it speaks to the best of what we can be. It's a narrative that transcends the mundane and taps into something profound, our shared humanity and our collective potential for change. The myth, in this case, is as essential as the man. It motivates, it galvanizes, and yes, sometimes it glosses over the complexities. But it also serves as a rallying cry, a reminder that while the road to justice is long, it's a journey worth taking. So, is MLK Day a meaningful tribute or just another day off? The answer, like most things in life, is both. It's what we make of it. For some, it's a chance to reflect and renew their commitment to equality. For others, it's a welcome break from the grind. But perhaps the real power of MLK Day lies in its potential to spark conversation, to encourage action, and to remind us that the dream is still alive, waiting for us to take the next step. In the end, the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. isn't confined to a single day on the calendar. It's woven into the fabric of our national consciousness, a constant challenge to live up to the ideals of justice, equality, and love. As we look to the future, question isn't whether the dream is still relevant. It's how we can bring it closer to reality. It's about using our voices, our votes, and our actions to build the world King envisioned. Because while the dream may have started with one man, it's up to all of us to see it through. So, as the sun sets on another MLK Day, remember that the work of justice is ongoing, the dream is still alive, and each of us has a role to play. It's a daunting task, but as King once said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And with each step we take, we bring that arc a little closer to a brighter, more equitable future. In the year 750 CE, the Abbasids pulled off one of history's most audacious coups, putting the game into Game of Thrones centuries before George R.R. Martin even picked up a quill. The Umayyad Caliphate, which had been the ruling dynasty since 661 CE, suddenly found themselves on the wrong end of a political sword. But hey, that's what happens when you underestimate the power of a good strategy mixed with a sprinkle of good old-fashioned political intrigue. Let's set the scene. The Abbasids were like the underdog team that no one saw coming. They were descended from Muhammad's uncle, Al-Abbas, which gave them a bit of street cred in the Islamic world. But unlike their Umayyad rivals, who preferred to rule from the sun-kissed shores of Damascus, the Abbasids were more of a let's head east kind of dynasty. This was not just a random choice or a preference for a different kind of hummus. It was a calculated move that played into their grand strategy. The Abbasid revolution was nothing if not a masterclass in long-term planning. They knew they needed more than just swords to win this battle. They needed support, lots of it, and from as many disgruntled groups as possible. Enter the Persians, the Shia, and other non-Arab Muslims who felt sidelined by the Umayyad elite. The Abbasids promised them a more inclusive government, which sounded like sweet music to ears tired of the Umayyads' Arab-centric policies. The revolution kicked off in earnest in 747 CE, led by Abu Muslim, a figure shrouded in as much mystery as political charisma. By 750 C, the Abbasids had managed to rally an impressive coalition, and they didn't waste any time. The pivotal Battle of the Zab, fought near the Great Zab River in Iraq, was the game-changer. The Abbasids, with their well-organized and motivated forces, crushed the Umayyads, who probably should have spent less time sunbathing in Damascus and more time preparing for a fight. And what happened to the Umayyads, you ask? Well, most of them were wiped out in a rather dramatic fashion. The Abbasids invited them to a banquet under the guise of reconciliation, only to turn it into a bloodbath. Think of it as the medieval version of an email scam, only with much more dire consequences. However, one Umayyad managed to escape the carnage, fleeing to Spain to start a new Umayyad dynasty in exile. The escapade sounds like the plot of a high-stakes chase movie, but it's all true. With the Umayyads out of the way, the Abbasids had a blank canvas. They needed a new capital, a place that would not only signal the start of their reign, but also serve as a hub for the vast empire they envisioned. Enter Baghdad, a city whose name would soon become synonymous with intellectual and cultural brilliance. But why Baghdad? Why not stick with the old powers like Damascus, or even go back to the Arabian Peninsula? The answer, my friends, lies in trade routes. Baghdad was positioned smack dab in the heart of key trade routes between Asia, Africa, and Europe. It was the Silk Road's version of a rest stop with a 5-star hotel attached. The Tigris River flowed nearby, offering a watery highway for trade and communication. In short, it was a logistical dream, and the Abbasids were nothing if not pragmatic. They knew that controlling trade meant controlling wealth and influence, and Baghdad was the ticket to both. By 762 C, the city of Baghdad was officially founded. It was not just another city, it was a statement. The Abbasids envisioned it as a round city, a nod to the Persian legacy they admired. This was no mere architectural quirk. It symbolized how they saw their rule, central, all-encompassing and connected. Within a few decades, Baghdad would become the largest city in the world, a melting pot of cultures, ideas, and let's be honest, a lot of gold. But let's not romanticize the Abbasids too much. While they did bring about a golden age, it wasn't all starry nights and poetic musings. Building an empire was as much about economics as it was about culture. The Abbasids knew that money talks, and they were keen listeners. They implemented taxes that would make a modern-day accountant weep, and they weren't afraid to use them to their advantage. They also capitalized on the agricultural wealth of the Fertile Crescent, making sure that the breadbasket of the empire was always full. The Abbasid rise wasn't just a change in leadership. It was a seismic shift in the Islamic world. They brought in new ideas, new faces, and new places. The Umayyads had focused on expansion through conquest, but the Abbasids wanted to expand through influence, cultural, intellectual, and economic. This new approach would position them not just as rulers, but as pioneers of a new age. In the grand tapestry of history, the Abbasid Revolution was a turning point. It was a time when power shifted, borders were redrawn, and the Islamic world headed eastward, away from its Arab heartland into a new era of Persian influence. It was a time when the line between legend and reality blurred, creating a narrative as compelling as any epic. So, the next time you find yourself caught in the mundane trappings of modern life, remember the Abbasids. They took a gamble in 750 CE, and it paid off in spades. They were the ultimate strategists, the architects of a golden age, and if nothing else, they remind us that sometimes the best way to forge the future is to rewrite the rules of the past. Now, with the Umayyads out of the picture and Baghdad bustling like a medieval Silicon Valley, the Abbasids turned their gaze towards a different kind of conquest, not of lands, but of minds. Welcome to the Abbasid Golden Age, where the real battle was fought not with swords, but with scrolls and scholars. This was an era when the Caliphate's idea of collecting involved amassing books, not just territories. Picture a time when libraries were the treasure chests of civilization, and Baghdad was the X on the intellectual map. At the heart of this scholarly wonderland was the House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah if you're feeling fancy. Established in the early 9th century, it wasn't just a building. It was the epicenter of intellectual curiosity and the birthplace of algebra. Yes, algebra, the bane of many a high school student's existence, can thank the Abbasids for its origins. And if you've ever cursed while balancing an equation, remember, It was a guy named Al-Khwarizmi who laid the groundwork here. His work on Al-Jabr, or reunion of broken parts, was revolutionary, even if it sometimes feels like it's breaking your brain. The House of Wisdom was like the Avengers of intellect, bringing together scholars from across the Islamic world and beyond. They translated texts from Greek, Persian, Indian, and a host of other languages into Arabic. It was a veritable Babel of ideas, but unlike the biblical tower, this was an endeavor that actually united rather than divided. Where else could you find a Persian scholar debating philosophy with an Indian mathematician, while a Greek astronomer scribbled notes in the corner? It was like an intellectual potluck where everyone brought the best dish their culture had to offer. This melting pot of knowledge didn't just happen by accident. The Abbasids knew that to be a true powerhouse, they needed more than just political clout. They needed to be the brainy kid in the class, the one everyone wanted to cheat off during exams. And so, they threw open the gates of Baghdad to thinkers and dreamers from all corners of the earth, offering patronage to those who dared to push the boundaries of what was known. But this wasn't just some altruistic pursuit of wisdom for wisdom's sake. The Abbasids were shrewd. They saw the economic and political advantages that came with being a hub of innovation. Knowledge was power, and power was money. They understood that advancements in science and technology could translate into practical benefits, like improved agriculture, better navigation for trade, and more efficient administration of their sprawling empire. In short, they were turning brainpower into hard cash, and it was paying off. Let's not forget the arts, where the Abbasids also made their mark. Poetry flourished under their rule, with the likes of Al-Mutanabbi crafting verses that would make Shakespeare envious. Music, too, found a vibrant home in the empire. The oud, a stringed instrument that would later evolve into the European lute, was strummed in the courts of Baghdad, setting the soundtrack for an era of creativity. And while we're myth-busting, let's tackle the romanticized notion that the Abbasid Caliphate was some kind of utopian society. Sure, there were golden moments, but the reality was also filled with the same political machinations and human flaws that color every chapter of history. The Abbasids weren't above using their wealth and influence to squash dissent and maintain control. The caliphs had their share of palace intrigue, with enough backstabbing and betrayal to rival any modern-day political drama. Yet, despite the less savory aspects of their rule, the Abbasids left a legacy that would echo through the ages. Their contributions to science, art, and philosophy laid the groundwork for the Renaissance in Europe centuries later. When Europe was still fumbling in the Dark Ages, the Islamic world was lighting up the night with the glow of discovery and wonder. So, as we marvel at this golden age, let's remember that it was built on a foundation of ambition, intellect, and a healthy dose of pragmatism. The Abbasids knew that the true power of an empire wasn't just in the strength of its armies, but in the brilliance of its ideas. They turned Baghdad into a beacon of knowledge, a place where the world's brightest minds gathered to learn, share, and push the boundaries of what was possible. The Abbasid Golden Age wasn't just a time of scholarly achievement. It was a testament to the enduring power of intellectual curiosity and cultural exchange. It reminds us that history isn't just a series of dates and battles, but a tapestry threaded with the ideas and dreams of those who dared to imagine a better world. And while the Abbasids may have faded into the annals of history, their legacy of enlightenment continues to inspire those who seek to understand the world around them. As the Abbasid Golden Age unfolded like a particularly intricate Persian carpet, the everyday life of an Abbasid citizen was anything but ordinary. Imagine living in Baghdad, a city that was basically the medieval equivalent of New York City on steroids, or at least coffee. With a population that ballooned to nearly 1 million people by the 9th century, Baghdad was a bustling metropolis where camel caravans shared the road with street vendors, and the air was thick with the scent of spices, sweat, and probably a touch of sandalwood. The markets, or souks, were the heart of this vibrant city. They were the original Amazon, minus the 2-day shipping. If it existed, you could probably find it in a Baghdad souk. From silk and spices to the latest in scholarly texts, these markets were a kaleidoscope of commerce and culture. You'd overhear merchants haggling in a symphony of languages, Arabic, Persian, Greek, and even a smattering of Chinese, thanks to the Silk Road connections. Talk about a linguistic melting pot. But it wasn't just about sharping. Here, in the heart of the city, you'd find the social dynamics that would make any soap opera look like a snooze fest. Gossip was the currency of the day, exchanged as freely as dirhams and dinars. The social hierarchy was as complex as any Byzantine plot, with the Caliph and his court at the top, followed by scholars, merchants, and artisans, each jostling for their slice of the Abbasid pie. Speaking of pie, let's talk food. Baghdad's culinary scene was a fusion of flavors, a testament to the empire's reach. Think of it as a potluck where everyone brought their A-game. From fragrant biryanis to sweet, honey-soaked baklava, the city's cuisine was a microcosm of its cultural diversity. And if you were lucky, you might score an invitation to a banquet at the Caliph's palace, where the dishes were as elaborate as the politics. But life in Baghdad wasn't all about eating and shopping, though let's be honest, that's a pretty sweet gig. Public baths were a cornerstone of daily life, serving not just as places to scrub away the dust of the desert, but as social hubs where deals were brokered and alliances formed. Picture a Roman bathhouse, but with more poetry recitations and fewer toga malfunctions. And speaking of poetry, let's not overlook the original Twitter, the Majlis. These were intellectual salons where poets and scholars gathered to exchange ideas, and let's face it, show off a bit. The Abbasids were aficionados of the spoken word, and poetry was the social media of the day, spreading news, ideas, and sometimes scandal faster than you can say, retweet. Now, let's pause to debunk a myth. While it's tempting to romanticize the Abbasid era as all high culture and enlightenment, the reality was more nuanced. Yes, the intellectual elite thrived, but the average citizen wasn't exactly living in a constant state of philosophical bliss. Life was tough, with the ever-present threat of disease, crime, and political upheaval. The streets of Baghdad might have been paved with intellectual gold, but they were also home to a fair share of hardship. Still, there was one innovation that truly revolutionized everyday life: paper. Introduced from China, paper began to replace parchment and papyrus by the 9th century, sparking an economic boom that would make even the savviest modern entrepreneur green with envy. Paper was cheaper and easier to produce, which meant more books, more records, and more literacy. It was essentially the tech boom of the medieval world, and Baghdad was Silicon Valley. The proliferation of paper was a game-changer for the Abbasid economy. It facilitated trade by making record-keeping more efficient and allowed for the rapid dissemination of knowledge. In a world where information was power, the ability to produce and share written work gave the Abbasids a significant edge over less paper-savvy rivals. And while we're on the subject of innovation, let's not forget the economic drivers behind this golden age. The Abbasids were masterful at exploiting their geographical position, turning Baghdad into a hub for international trade. The city sat at the crossroads of major trade routes, connecting the east to the west. This wasn't just about moving goods, it was about moving ideas, philosophies, and technologies. But of course, even in a golden age, not everything was gold. Political intrigue was a constant undercurrent, with the Caliphate facing its share of rebellions, coups, and internal strife. The Abbasids had to navigate a delicate balance between maintaining power and fostering the intellectual and cultural atmosphere that defined their reign. So, while the Abbasid Caliphate conjures images of wisdom and wonder, it was also a time of contrasts. The same streets that echoed with the footsteps of scholars also bore witness to the clamor of political unrest. The same markets that dazzled with goods from distant lands were also battlegrounds for economic survival. It was a time when the high ideals of the House of Wisdom coexisted with the gritty realities of empire building. In peeling back the layers of Abbasid society, we find a world rich in complexity and contradiction. The Abbasids may have built a golden age, but they did so on the foundation of human ambition and ingenuity, with all the messiness and marvel that entails. As we move forward, let's keep unraveling this tapestry to see how the threads of history can illuminate our present. The Abbasid story is far from over, and there's much more to explore in the chapters ahead. But as the Abbasid tale unfolds, the glittering facade starts to reveal its cracks. Sure, Baghdad was the intellectual epicenter of the world, but beneath the shimmering surface, the political landscape was about as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. The Abbasid Caliphate, once the toast of the medieval world, found itself juggling more internal power struggles than a reality TV family reunion. Let's talk about those regional powers. You know how every empire has its ambitious underlings? Well, the Abbasids had them in spades. As the Caliphate expanded, it became a sprawling conglomeration of diverse cultures and territories, each with its own power players eyeing the throne. The governors of these regions, or emirs, began to flex their muscles, sensing that the central authority in Baghdad was more interested in philosophical debates than political dominance. These local leaders weren't just content with a slice of the pie. They wanted the whole bakery. Take the rise of the Tahirid dynasty in Khorasan, for example. Established in 821 CE, Tahir ibn Hussein was granted governorship of this vast eastern region as a reward for his support of the Abbasid Caliph al-Mamun. But like a kid with the keys to a candy store, the Tahirids started running Khorasan as their own mini-empire. They collected taxes, maintained their own armies, and paid lip service to Baghdad only when absolutely necessary. It was a passive-aggressive rebellion, the medieval equivalent of changing your Netflix password so your roommate can't use it. Meanwhile, the western regions weren't exactly sitting quietly. The Aghlabids of North Africa, another semi-autonomous dynasty, began asserting their independence in the early 9th century. While they sent a nod and a wink to the caliph in Baghdad, they were effectively running their own show. They built their capital in Kaidwan, modern-day Tunisia, and started launching raids into Sicily, because why not? Conquest is the ultimate power move after all. Now, if you think this was all happening with the caliph's blessing, think again. The central government was stretched thinner than a hipster's wallet, trying to manage regional ambitions while maintaining the illusion of a unified empire. The caliphs were caught in a constant game of whack-a-mole, attempting to quash revolts and power grabs quicker than you can say decentralization. Add to that the constant threat of external pressures from the Byzantines and other neighbors, and it becomes clear that the Caliphate's golden age was sitting on a distinctly shaky foundation. Speaking of external pressures, let's not forget the Byzantines, who were lurking on the empire's northwestern border like a nosy neighbor peering over the fence. By the late 8th and early 9th centuries, the Abbasids were engaged in an ongoing chess game with the Byzantine Empire. They traded blows along the borders, each trying to outmaneuver the other in a series of raids and counter-raids. These weren't just border skirmishes. They were full-blown military campaigns that stretched the Abbasid resources and tested their resolve. And as if dealing with rebellious governors and Byzantine incursions wasn't enough, the Abbasids had another headache brewing from within, the peasant revolts. Yes, even in a so-called golden age, the average farmer wasn't exactly living the dream. Heavy taxation and the pressure to produce more for the bustling cities led to widespread discontent. Peasants were the backbone of the Abbasid economy, yet they found themselves bearing the brunt of its burdens. Eventually, their patience snapped, leading to uprisings that shook the very foundations of the empire. The Zanj Rebellion, which kicked off in 869 CE, was a particularly explosive example. The Zanj were African slaves working in the salt marshes of southern Iraq, enduring brutal conditions that would make even the most hardened reality TV producer wince. Led by Ali ibn Muhammad, the rebels managed to capture Basra, one of the empire's key cities, and held it for over a decade. It was a stark reminder that when you push people to the edge, they just might push back. In the grand scheme of things, the Zanj Rebellion highlighted the logistical nightmare of managing a vast empire built on diverse and often discontented populations. The Abbasids found themselves fighting battles on multiple fronts, against external foes, ambitious governors, and their own oppressed peoples. The dream of a cohesive, harmonious caliphate was slowly unraveling, and no amount of philosophical discourse in Baghdad could sew it back together. As these cracks widened, the caliphs themselves became more like figureheads than actual rulers. The real power started to shift towards military leaders and bureaucrats who wielded the day-to-day control of the empire. The caliphs were often puppets, manipulated by those who held the real strings. It was a classic case of the emperor having no clothes, except in this case, it was the caliph sitting awkwardly on an increasingly wobbly throne. And so, as we explore the gritty underbelly of the Abbasid Golden Age, it's clear that glamour and grit often go hand in hand. The empire was a complex tapestry of intellectual brilliance and political chaos, woven together with threads of ambition, power, and rebellion. The Abbasids were navigating a precarious path, and as we move forward in this historical journey, we'll delve deeper into how these dynamics continue to shape the fate of one of history's most fascinating empires. Hold onto your scrolls, because the story of the Abbasids is far from over. We've still got power struggles to unravel, cultural legacies to explore, and perhaps a few more myths to bust along the way. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where the plot only thickens. As the curtain rises on the Abbasid Empire's final act, the scene is set for a drama of epic proportions. The political fragmentation we've seen building was only the appetizer in this historical feast of chaos and complexity. The Abbasid Caliphate, once the glittering epicenter of a cultural and intellectual renaissance, was now grappling with a slow but inexorable decline. This was a time when the once unified empire was splintering faster than a clay pot in an earthquake, and the external pressures were about to crank the tension up to 11. Enter the Seljuks, a group of nomadic Turks with a penchant for shaking things up. By the mid-11th century, these horse-riding warriors galloped onto the scene from the steppes of Central Asia, bringing with them a refreshing, or depending on your perspective, terrifying, dose of military prowess. The Abbasids, already weakened by internal strife, found themselves in desperate need of allies who could help them fend off those pesky Byzantines and other external threats. The Seljuks, with their formidable military, seemed like the perfect fit. It was a classic case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, except this friendship came with a price tag. By 1055 C, the Seljuks had effectively taken over Baghdad, with their leader, Tughril Beg, being welcomed as a savior. In reality, it was more of a hostile takeover than a friendly visit, as the Seljuks assumed the real power behind the Abbasid throne, turning the caliphs into little more than ceremonial figureheads. While the Seljuks' military might provide temporary relief, it also marked a significant shift in power dynamics. The caliphs, once the supreme rulers, were now the political equivalent of a monarch butterfly pinned under glass. Beautiful to look at but utterly powerless. This arrangement continued for centuries, with the Abbasids maintaining religious authority while the Seljuks, and later other Turkic dynasties, handled the heavy lifting of governance and defense. It was a precarious balance, akin to a house of cards built on a windy day. But wait, there's more. As if internal fragmentation and external invasions weren't enough, the 13th century decided to throw yet another wrench into the works. Enter the Mongols, led by the infamous Hulagu Khan, whose idea of diplomacy was more scorched earth than olive branch. In 1258 C, the Mongols sacked Baghdad with a ferocity that would make even a seasoned action movie director flinch. They razed the city, slaughtered its inhabitants, and obliterated the House of Wisdom, turning centuries of knowledge into ashes. This event marked the definitive end of the Abbasid Caliphate's political power, as the once mighty empire was reduced to a shadow of its former self. Now, let's not get too bogged down in the doom and gloom. Despite the political disintegration and military disasters, the Abbasid legacy is anything but a footnote in history. Their contributions to culture, science, and philosophy have left an indelible mark on the world. The golden age of the Abbasids wasn't just about grand libraries and intellectual salons. It was about setting the stage for future innovation. The House of Wisdom may have been destroyed, but its spirit lived on. The scholars who once gathered there laid the groundwork for the Renaissance in Europe, with translations of Greek and Roman texts filtering back into the Western world. The Abbasids were the original influencers, spreading ideas and knowledge like a medieval Instagram story gone viral. Take Al-Khwarizmi, the mathematician whose work on algebra wasn't just about solving equations. It was about changing the way humans think about numbers and their applications. Or consider the philosopher Al-Farabi, whose ideas on political theory and ethics were centuries ahead of his time. These thinkers didn't just contribute to their fields, they redefined them, creating a legacy that would inform scientific and philosophical thought for generations to come. And let's debunk some myths while we're at it. The Abbasid era is often romanticized as a time of universal peace and enlightenment, but the reality was far more nuanced. Sure, Baghdad was a hub of intellectual activity, but it was also a place of political intrigue and social stratification. The Golden Age was not a utopia. It was a testament to the complex interplay of power, culture, and ambition. The Abbasids were masterful at navigating these waters, but they were also products of their time, with all the flaws and limitations that entailed. So, why does the Abbasid era matter today? Because it reminds us that history is not just a series of events, but a tapestry woven from the threads of human endeavor. The Abbasids, with their achievements and failures, their triumphs and tribulations, offer a mirror reflecting the complexities of our own world. They teach us that progress is not a straight line, but a winding path filled with obstacles and opportunities. Their story is a reminder that even in times of turmoil, the pursuit of knowledge and understanding can illuminate the darkest of ages. As we wrap up this whirlwind tour of the Abbasid Caliphate, let's not forget the empire's enduring impact. Despite the political fragmentation and eventual collapse, the Abbasids left behind a legacy that continues to inspire. Their contributions to science, art, and culture have shaped the world we know today, proving that even in decline, an empire can still shine brightly. So, the next time you find yourself grappling with the complexities of modern life, remember the Abbasids. They navigated a world of challenges and contradictions, and in doing so, they carved out a golden age that still resonates through the corridors of history. If you thought office politics were tricky, try navigating the pre-Confederacy era of the Iroquois. 5 tribes, Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca, engaged in enough squabbles to put a reality TV show to shame. Before unity was the name of the game, squabbling was the national pastime. Forget water cooler gossip. These tribes had intertribal conflicts as frequent as your daily caffeine fix. It was a time of chaos, where alliances shifted faster and the latest TikTok trends and feuds were as common as bad Wi-Fi connections. Let's put this into perspective. The region wasn't exactly a peaceful neighborhood. Picture the northeastern part of what's now the United States, a sprawling land of lush forests and vast waterways, but with a social atmosphere that was more Game of Thrones than Disney's Pocahontas. The Iroquois tribes were caught in a constant cycle of tit-for-tat skirmishes, where disagreements over hunting grounds, resources, and even personal vendettas could ignite quicker than a Twitter flame war. The Mohawk, for instance, were known as the Keepers of the Eastern Door due to their geographical location. But don't let the poetic title fool you. These folks were fierce warriors. Think of them as the bouncers of the eastern frontier. They were not only guarding their territory, but also their reputation, which was practically a full-time job back then. The Oneida, meanwhile, were their neighbors to the west, often caught in the crossfire or joining in the fray, depending on the day. Their name means people of the standing stone, which sounds serene, but in reality, standing stones were likely the only stable things in their lives. The Onondaga, smack dab in the center, were the political heart of the eventual Confederacy, but at this time, they were just trying to keep from getting caught in everyone else's crosshairs. The Cayuga were to the west of the Onondaga, living near the shores of the Finger Lakes, and the Seneca were the largest and most westerly tribe, known as the Great Hill People, or Keepers of the Western Door. They had the most territory, and unsurprisingly, the most to lose. Each tribe had its own culture, language, dialect, and customs, but they were united in their love of a good conflict. It was like they all signed up for a season-long dodgeball match with no referees and high stakes. The stakes, by the way, weren't just bragging rights. We're talking survival here. In a world where your next meal depended on the hunt, and the weather could ruin your entire year's food supply, ensuring your tribe was top dog, or at least not the underdog, was vital. Now, while it might sound like these tribes were just spoiling for a fight, there was more to it than just testosterone and tomahawks. Land was the lifeline of the Iroquois, the ultimate prize in a zero-sum game. We're talking about prime hunting grounds and fertile land for farming the Three Sisters: corn, beans, and squash. This agricultural trio wasn't just a catchy name. It was a dietary staple. Without these crops, the Iroquois might as well have been trying to survive on kale smoothies and quinoa. These tribes were also dealing with the external pressures of European colonization. The Europeans were like the new kids on the block with bizarre fashion sense and an insatiable appetite for land and resources. They brought with them guns, germs, and steel, to borrow a phrase, and they were upending the established order faster than you can say. Smallpox. The Iroquois had to contend not only with each other, but with these newcomers whose intentions were as opaque as a politician's promises. The constant threat of intertribal warfare, combined with the encroaching European presence, created a pressure cooker situation. If you're looking for a metaphor, think of the Iroquois tribes as a group of frenemies stuck in an escape room with the clock ticking down. They needed a way to stop fighting over who ate whose leftovers and start focusing on the real threats outside their door. So how did these squabbling tribes manage to stop warring like siblings in the backseat of a long car ride and start working together? Well, that's the story of the Iroquois Confederacy, a tale of unity that rose from the ashes of chaos. But before we get to the comeback moment, understand that the groundwork for unity was laid in a landscape of conflict and competition where the stakes were higher than influencers' follow account. In the grand scheme of history, the Iroquois Confederacy's formation was like the Avengers assembling, only with fewer capes and more feathers. But all of that is still ahead. For now, know that the road to unity was paved with rivalries, battles, and a lot of convincing that cooperation was a better survival strategy than constant conflict. And as we'll see, it wasn't just a matter of deciding to play nice. It involved complex negotiations, visionary leaders, and a little bit of divine intervention. But more on that later. For now, rest easy knowing that even history's great alliances started with a few good squabbles. Now, where were we? Ah, yes, the Iroquois tribes were like frenemies trying to escape an ever-shrinking room of conflict. But lo and behold, into this swirling maelstrom of drama entered an unlikely duo who were about to pull a plot twist worthy of a Netflix series. Meet Daganoweda and Hiawatha, the original odd couple of peace who turned their grand visions into a living, breathing confederacy, without the help of social media influencers or TED talks. First up, Daganoweda, whose name means the Great Peacemaker. Now, if you're picturing some divine, haloed figure descending from the heavens, let's hit pause on that thought. Legends have him as a prophet with a few visions under his belt, the kind that would make today's dream interpreters green with envy. But before you get swept up in the mystical vibes, remember that even the most divine-seeming visions need a healthy dose of practicality to leap off the scrolls and into reality. Daganoweda was said to be born under miraculous circumstances, a virgin birth, no less, in what's now Ontario, Canada. His mother allegedly tried to drown him 3 times, convinced his birth was a bad omen. Spoiler alert, he survived, which is a testament to either divine intervention or sheer stubbornness. Take your pick. What's more likely is that Daganoweda was a man of acute perception, seeing the endless tribal feuds not as an unavoidable fate, but as a solvable puzzle. And then there was Hiawatha, no relation to the Longfellow poem that would later romanticize him into eternity. This Hiawatha was a Mohawk turned Onondaga by marriage, a skilled orator whose persuasive powers were the stuff of legend, or at least very effective town hall meetings. Think of Hiawatha as the charismatic communicator to Daganoweda's visionary. Together, they were like Lennon and McCartney, if Lennon had a penchant for peacemaking and McCartney was adept at rallying a crowd. But let's not get too starry-eyed. The reality of their partnership was as gritty as it was groundbreaking. They didn't just stroll into a tribal council and drop a manifesto. Their blueprint for peace was a masterclass in diplomacy, necessity, and a little bit of strategic showmanship. Daganoweda had the vision, a confederacy of tribes united under the great law of peace, but it was Hiawatha who had the rhetorical flair to make it sound like a no-brainer to the skeptical chiefs. Here's where we debunk a bit of the divine narrative. While Daganoweda's visions are often painted as miraculous, they were likely steeped in the socio-political reality of the time. With European settlers encroaching and resources dwindling, a unified front was not just idealistic. It was rational, and Hiawatha's persuasive skills didn't materialize from thin air either. They were honed against the backdrop of personal tragedy. His wife and daughters were killed in a tribal conflict, giving him a vested interest in ending the cycle of violence. So, what did their alliance look like in practice? Imagine traveling from village to village, through forests and across rivers, in an era when a road trip meant days of canoeing and hiking. The duo faced skepticism, resistance, and probably more than a few eye rolls from elders who'd seen it all before. But they persisted, armed with the kind of tenacity that makes marathon runners look like couch potatoes. Their message was simple but revolutionary: peace through unity. Each tribe would maintain its own leadership and autonomy, but come together in a grand council where decisions required consensus. It was a system designed to curb the kind of internecine warfare that had turned their lands into a perpetual heart zone. It also cleverly balanced power dynamics, ensuring no single tribe could dominate the others. This was not just peace, but a pragmatic form of power sharing that could rival any modern coalition government. To sweeten the deal, Hiawatha introduced the wampum belt as a symbol of unity. These belts, made from shell beads, were not just decorative. They were mnemonic devices that recorded agreements and treaties. Think of them as the original blockchain: secure, decentralized, and a pain to make, which probably made them even more valuable. Now, about those divine visions. While Daganoweda is often depicted as having a direct line to the spiritual realm, it's worth noting that his visions were likely influenced by real-world pressures. The Iroquois were facing environmental changes, shrinking resources, and the looming threat of European expansion. Daganoweda's vision wasn't just a dream. It was a response to a crisis that demanded innovative solutions. And let's not forget the economic context. The Iroquois needed a way to secure their trade routes and resources without the constant threat of being backstabbed by a rival tribe. The Confederacy provided stability, which in turn allowed for more efficient agriculture, hunting, and trade. This wasn't just about peace, it was about prosperity. So here we have it: 2 men, 1 vision, and a whole lot of determination. Daganoweda and Hiawatha didn't just dream of peace, they engineered it, drawing on a mix of spiritual guidance, personal tragedy, and political savvy. They turned a landscape of chaos into a blueprint for unity that would endure for centuries. In the grand tapestry of history, their partnership stands out not just for its idealism, but for its realism. They understood that lasting peace wasn't about grand gestures or divine interventions, but about hard-won consensus and practical governance. And as the Iroquois Confederacy began to take shape, it was clear that this was no mere alliance of convenience. It was a radical reimagining of power and peace, one that would influence not just the tribes, but the very fabric of North American history. But hold on to your wampum belts, because the story is far from over. The Confederacy's formation was just the beginning. In the chapters to come, we'll explore how this alliance navigated the turbulent waters of colonial expansion, European diplomacy, and internal challenges. The Iroquois Confederacy was about to become a powerhouse, but not without facing its own share of trials and tribulations. Stay tuned, because this historical roller coaster is just getting started. As the dust settled from the formation of the Iroquois Confederacy, you could almost hear the collective sigh of relief from the tribes. But before anyone could kick back and toast to their newfound unity, it was time to dive into the nitty-gritty details of governance, a topic that might not scream excitement, but is as crucial as oxygen to a scuba diver. Enter the great law of peace, the Iroquois groundbreaking constitution. And let me tell you, it makes the founding fathers' work look like it was scribbled on the back of a napkin after a long night at the tavern. First, let's tackle the Grand Council, the beating heart of the Confederacy's political machine. Picture this: a group of 50 chiefs, known as sachems, gathering in a council house. These sachems weren't just any leaders. They were selected for their wisdom and experience, not their campaign promises or ability to sling mud during debates. Talk about a refreshing change of pace. The council met regularly, and their decisions required consensus. That's right, folks, unanimous agreement. Imagine trying to get 50 people to agree on pizza toppings, let alone matters of war, peace, and governance. But this requirement for consensus was a stroke of genius, ensuring that decisions reflected the collective will rather than the whims of a few. Now, if you think the Grand Council was just a bunch of old guys in feathered headdresses, think again. The role of women, especially the clan mothers, was pivotal. Forget what you know about patriarchy. The Iroquois had a matrilineal system, meaning descent and inheritance were passed through the female line. Clan mothers were like the board of directors, with the power to appoint and depose sachems. If a sachem wasn't cutting it, the clan mothers could give him the boot. Take notes. Modern politicians. Here's an example of accountability without needing a recall election. This system of checks and balances was a masterstroke that would make Montesquieu nod in approval. The clan mothers ensured that power wasn't concentrated in the hands of a few, and that the voices of the people resonated through the council halls. They were the unsung architects of the Confederacy's stability, wielding influence with a quiet strength that shaped the course of Iroquois history. The great law of peace wasn't just about governance. It was a societal blueprint. It laid out principles of justice, collective responsibility, and most intriguingly, conflict resolution. In a world where disputes could easily escalate into blood feuds, the law offered a peaceful alternative: compensation, negotiation, and reconciliation. It was like they had discovered the secret recipe for a harmonious society, while the rest of the world was still trying to figure out how not to stab each other in the back over land disputes. Economically, the Confederacy thrived under this new order. With peace came stability, and with stability came prosperity. The Iroquois were able to expand their trade networks, exchanging goods like furs and crops with neighboring tribes, and eventually European settlers. Their agricultural system, particularly the cultivation of the Three Sisters, flourished, feeding the population and fueling growth. They were essentially the original locavores, long before it was trendy. But let's not romanticize this too much. The great law of peace was as much a product of necessity as it was of visionary thinking. The Iroquois were surrounded by external threats: rival tribes, encroaching settlers, and the ever-looming specter of resource depletion. The Confederacy was a pragmatic response to these challenges, a way to ensure survival in an increasingly complex and dangerous world. It was less about holding hands and singing around a campfire, and more about strategic alliances, realpolitik, and a dash of idealism. While the Iroquois were busy crafting their society, the Europeans were having their own fun across the Atlantic with wars, plagues, and religious upheaval. As these newcomers set their sights on the New World, they encountered the Iroquois, a formidable power with a unified front and a political system that, quite frankly, put their own to shame. The Iroquois Confederacy became a crucial player in the balance of power in North America, their influence extending far beyond their immediate borders. But the Iroquois weren't just sitting pretty, basking in their newfound unity. The Confederacy was a dynamic entity, constantly evolving to meet the challenges of the day. As European influence grew, so too did the need for diplomatic acumen. The Iroquois became adept at playing colonial powers against each other, leveraging their position to maintain autonomy and secure favorable trade terms. They were the ultimate diplomatic chess players, positioning themselves to benefit from the chaotic game of colonial expansion. In the grand scheme of things, the Iroquois Confederacy was a testament to the power of unity, vision, and a well-crafted constitution. The great law of peace wasn't just a set of rules. It was a living document that guided the Confederacy through centuries of change and challenge. And while it might not have come with a Bill of Rights or a preamble penned by Quill, its impact was profound, shaping the destiny of a people, and by extension, the course of history. Yet, as with any great story, the tale of the Iroquois Confederacy is far from over. In the chapters to come, we'll delve into the trials and tribulations that tested this alliance, from internal disputes to the pressures of colonial encroachment. The Iroquois Confederacy is on the brink of becoming a powerhouse, but the road ahead is anything but smooth. So, fasten your seatbelts and prepare for a wild ride through history as the Confederacy navigates the turbulent waters of an ever-changing world. As we ride the historical roller coaster into the next chapter, let's shift gears and delve into the economic and diplomatic prowess of the Iroquois Confederacy, a group of tribes so savvy they could have taught a masterclass in geopolitics long before anyone coined the term. Forget the notion of the noble savage, living in blissful ignorance of the wider world. The Iroquois were anything but naive. They were shrewd operators in a complex geopolitical chess game, and their moves were anything but primitive. First, let's talk trade. Imagine a network as expansive and efficient as Amazon Prime, but without the 2-day shipping guarantee. The Iroquois weren't just trading beads and furs for fun. They were orchestrating a commercial empire that stretched across the northeastern United States and into Canada. They exchanged goods like furs, corn, and wampum, those fancy shell beads, with a variety of tribes, creating a sprawling trade network that buzzed with economic activity. When the Europeans showed up with their shiny trinkets and muskets, the Iroquois knew exactly how to leverage these new arrivals to enhance their own market clout. The fur trade, in particular, was the gold rush of its time. Beaver pelts were the iPhones of the 17th century. Everyone wanted one, and they were willing to pay a hefty price. The French, English, and Dutch were like kids in a candy store, eager to get their hands on these valuable furs. The Iroquois, with their strategic location and keen negotiating skills, positioned themselves as indispensable middlemen. They didn't just survive the European incursion, they capitalized on it. But let's not get carried away with visions of peaceful barter markets. The Iroquois Confederacy's economic strategy was backed by a healthy dose of realpolitik. They were masters of playing one European power against another, ensuring no single nation gained too much influence in their territory. This wasn't just about keeping the peace. It was about maintaining a balance of power that allowed the Iroquois to stay on top. Take, for instance, the Beaver Wars, a series of conflicts in the 17th century that saw the Iroquois flexing their military and diplomatic muscles in pursuit of control over the fur trade. These weren't just random acts of aggression. They were calculated moves to secure economic dominance. By the time the dust settled, the Iroquois had expanded their territory and cemented their role as key players in the fur trade, all while keeping the Europeans on their toes. And speaking of Europeans, it's time to debunk the myth of the one-dimensional, peace-loving native. The Iroquois were adept diplomats who knew when to wield the olive branch and when to sharpen the tomahawk, engaged in a series of treaties and alliances that would make any modern diplomat's head spin. For example, the Covenant Chain, a series of alliances and treaties with the English, illustrates their diplomatic finesse. The Iroquois weren't just reacting to European expansion. They were actively shaping it, navigating treaties that preserved their autonomy and ensured their economic interests were safeguarded. Let's not forget the role of the Iroquois women in this economic landscape. While the men were out hunting and negotiating, the women were the backbone of the agricultural economy. They cultivated the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, ensuring a stable food supply that supported their communities and fueled their trade networks. This wasn't just subsistence farming. It was a sophisticated agricultural system that allowed the Iroquois to thrive and expand their influence. So, where does this leave us in the grand narrative of the Iroquois Confederacy? We're looking at a society that was anything but static. The Iroquois weren't just reacting to the European presence. They were engaging with it in ways that demonstrated a deep understanding of the shifting political and economic landscapes. Their ability to adapt and thrive in this environment was nothing short of remarkable. But let's not romanticize the past too much. The Iroquois were navigating a world of cutthroat competition and rapidly changing alliances. Their success was hard-won, the result of strategic brilliance and a willingness to adapt to new realities. They weren't just living in harmony with nature. They were actively shaping their environment to suit their needs. And as we move forward in this tale, the challenges facing the Iroquois Confederacy are far from over. The European presence in North America is growing, and with it, the pressures on the Iroquois to maintain their autonomy and protect their way of life. The stakes are high, and the game is only getting more complex. In a world where the lines between friend and foe are constantly shifting, the Iroquois Confederacy stands as a testament to the power of unity, adaptability, and strategic thinking. Their story is far from finished, and the next chapters promise to be as thrilling as the last. So, buckle up, because the journey of the Iroquois is one for the ages, filled with intrigue, power plays, and the relentless drive to survive and thrive in an ever-changing world. And so, as the Iroquois Confederacy deftly navigated the treacherous waters of 17th-century geopolitics, they were laying down the kind of constitutional groundwork that would later make democratic enthusiasts drool. Think of them as the original architects of a political experiment that would echo across centuries, leaving a legacy that, like an influencer's questionable tweet, refused to fade. But before we deep dive into the Confederacy's influence on modern democracy, let's take a moment to appreciate the bittersweet reality of their eventual decline amidst colonial expansion. Picture this. The Iroquois, once a formidable powerhouse, now faced the juggernaut of European colonization. The 18th century was not kind to them, much like a season finale that left you with more questions than answers. The arrival of the British and French didn't just complicate matters. It flipped the chessboard entirely. These European powers, with their insatiable appetite for land and resources, were like that one friend who always shows up to the potluck with an empty plate, expecting a feast. The Iroquois Confederacy, adept as they were at playing colonial powers against each other, suddenly found themselves in a game where the rules and the stakes had changed. The American Revolutionary War was a turning point. The Confederacy's strategic location meant they were caught in the crossfire of a conflict that was less about liberty and more about territorial control. Some tribes sided with the British, believing their victory would stem the tide of colonial expansion, while others threw their lot in with the American revolutionaries. Talk about a rock and a hard place. The Treaty of Paris in 1783, which ended the Revolutionary War, was a diplomatic snub of epic proportions. The British, who had once courted the Iroquois alliance, unceremoniously handed over vast tracts of Iroquois land to the Americans without so much as a "thank you for playing." The Confederacy, which once held sway over a territory larger than some European countries, found itself confined to reservations, a poignant reminder of the harsh realities of colonial expansion. But let's not dwell too long in the trenches of despair. The Iroquois legacy, like a well-crafted piece of art, continues to resonate. Their political structure, with its emphasis on consensus and collective governance, would go on to influence the framers of the United States Constitution. Benjamin Franklin himself, yes, the kite-flying, electricity-taming founding father, was an admirer of the Iroquois system. He saw in their Grand Council a model of unity and shared power that could be adapted to the fledgling American Republic. Imagine that. One of the leading lights of American independence cribbing notes from a group of tribes who had mastered the art of compromise long before it was cool. The Iroquois Confederacy's emphasis on checks and balances and the role of women in governance offered a fresh perspective in a world dominated by patriarchal norms. While the Founding Fathers didn't exactly rush to implement matrilineal systems or give women the vote that would take another century and a half, the influence of Iroquois governance was undeniable. It was like they were the original life coaches, showing the rest of the world how to balance power without resorting to tyranny or chaos. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Iroquois Confederacy's decline was a stark reminder of the messy, human side of history. The narrative isn't just one of idyllic harmony and democratic ideals, but of survival in a world where the odds were stacked against them. The Confederacy's story is one of resilience in the face of adversity, an unyielding spirit that refused to be extinguished despite the encroaching tide of colonialism. As we look back on the legacy of the Iroquois Confederacy, it's clear that their influence extends far beyond their own time and place. They were trailblazers of political innovation, crafting a system that balanced unity with diversity, authority with autonomy. Their story is a testament to the power of vision and cooperation, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, unity can be a formidable force. In the end, the Iroquois Confederacy teaches us that history is not a series of isolated events, but a tapestry woven from the threads of human ambition, ingenuity, and sometimes sheer stubbornness. Their legacy is a poignant reflection on the art of compromise, a reminder that even the most formidable alliances are forged in the crucible of conflict and cooperation. As we close this chapter on the Iroquois, let's carry forward their lessons, not just as a relic of the past, but as a beacon for the future. A future that, if we're lucky, is a little more unified, a little more just, and a lot more informed by the wisdom of those who came before us. There's something undeniably compelling about a man who can lose an eye and still see further than most kings with two. Enter Philip Roman II of Macedon, a guy who didn't just inherit a kingdom on the brink of collapse in 359 BCE, he practically snatched it from the jaws of disaster with a wink and a nod. Now, don't let the missing eye fool you. This guy had a vision clearer than a crystal ball, and he wasn't afraid to use it. Let's set the scene. Greece in the 4th century BCE wasn't a leisurely stroll through a sun-dappled olive grove. It was more like a chaotic marketplace where city-states bartered, bickered, and occasionally bludgeoned each other over power. Amid this turbulence, Macedon was the runt of the litter, a backwater kingdom overshadowed by its flashier neighbors like Athens and Sparta. While these powerhouse city-states were busy bickering over who had the best philosophers or the most fearsome warriors, Macedon was struggling just to keep the wolves at bay. Then along comes Philip, a 20-something upstart with a knack for turning adversity into opportunity. When he took the throne, Macedon was as strategically sound as a leaky boat in a storm. The Illyrians were sharpening their knives at the borders, and within, the royal court was a hotbed of intrigue and betrayal. But Philip, ever the opportunist, saw potential where others saw peril. One of his first moves, reinvent the military. Philip took a good, hard look at the ragtag band of soldiers he inherited and decided they needed a makeover. He introduced a formidable new weapon, the sarissa, a spear so long it practically poked the enemy from the next time zone. At about 18 feet, these spears transformed his foot soldiers into a porcupine of death, making the phalanx formation a force to be reckoned with. But Philip wasn't all about brute force. He was a maestro of diplomacy, with a penchant for strategic marriages that would make any soap opera seem tame. He married no fewer than 7 times, each spouse a political pawn in his Game of Thrones. These marriages weren't driven by love or even convenience. They were meticulously planned alliances meant to secure loyalty and peace with neighboring powers. His unions were like today's mergers and acquisitions, but with more ceremonial pomp and less paperwork. Speaking of diplomacy, Philip was a smooth operator who understood the power of gold as well as the sword. When a well-placed bribe could achieve more than a costly battle, you bet he'd choose the former. Philip had a knack for turning adversaries into allies with a few well-timed gifts. Money talks, and in Philip's case, it sang entire symphonies. By the time he was done, Macedon wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Philip had taken the skeletal remains of a kingdom and fleshed it out into a robust, formidable power. His military reforms and diplomatic finesse had bought Macedon a ticket to the big leagues, and he was just getting started. While his contemporaries were busy underestimating him, Philip was busy outmaneuvering them. He didn't just play the game, he rewrote the rules. His rise to power was a masterclass in turning the odds and the occasional blind spot to his advantage. So here's to Philip Roman II, the king who saw more with one eye than most ever do with two. But let's not kid ourselves. Philip's success wasn't just about seeing the world differently. It was about making the world see things his way, and he had the tools, or rather spears, to do it. Enter the Macedonian phalanx, the military formation that turned Philip's army into an unstoppable juggernaut. You know, the kind of force that makes you reconsider your life choices if you ever find yourself on the wrong end of those 18-foot sarissas. That's about as long as 3 NBA players lying head-to-toe if you're keeping score. Now, Philip didn't just hand out longer spears and call it a day. No, he was like the Steve Jobs of ancient warfare, combining innovation with an almost obsessive attention to detail. The phalanx wasn't just about the length of the sarissa, it was about discipline and coordination. Imagine a military ballet where each soldier knew their exact position in the dance of death. It was beautiful in a terrifying sort of way. But behind this elegant facade was a brutal reality. Training to wield the sarissa was no walk in the park, or olive grove, for that matter. These soldiers endured grueling drills that would make a Spartan wince. Picture this. Countless hours of hefting massive spears, marching in tight formations, and learning to pivot like your life depended on it, because, spoiler alert, it did. It was the ancient world's version of a hardcore boot camp, minus the motivational speeches and protein shakes. And let's talk economics for a second. Running an army like this didn't come cheap. Armies in ancient times were like voracious beasts, and Philip found himself feeding a particularly hungry monster. Maintaining the phalanx required not just manpower, but resources. Lots of them. We're talking about thousands of drachmas spent on weapons, armor, and provisions. The Macedonian economy had to be as sharp as the spears they wielded, and Philip's knack for resource management was nothing short of miraculous. But Philip wasn't just about flexing military muscle. He was the consummate political player in a game that made chess look like checkers. The Greek city-states were a puzzle, and Philip had a knack for solving it with a combination of charm, cunning, and the occasional threat of force. His ability to turn enemies into allies was almost sorcerous, a bit like a medieval influencer, but with more stabbings and fewer hashtags. Take Athens, for example, a city-state with a penchant for democracy and drama, its citizens had a love-hate relationship with Philip. One minute they were denouncing him as a tyrant, the next they were accepting his gifts with open arms. It was a political tango, and Philip danced it with aplomb. He didn't just sow discord among his rivals, he harvested it, turning their infighting into opportunities for Macedon's rise. Philip's charm wasn't just a matter of smooth talk. It was calculated, like a master chef seasoning a dish to perfection. Sometimes it was a marriage proposal, other times it was a well-timed loan or a strategic alliance. He understood that gold could grease the wheels of diplomacy just as effectively as it funded his military machine. His ability to mix sweet talk with strategic marriages was legendary, painting him as a king who could win hearts as easily as he conquered lands. Yet, behind the diplomacy and the phalanx, there was a harsh reality. Philip's vision of a unified Greece under Macedonian leadership wasn't universally adored. Many saw him as a threat to their autonomy and cherished way of life. There was no shortage of city-states ready to test Philip's patience and his army's endurance. But Philip had the foresight to see that unity, even if achieved through conquest, was necessary for survival against larger threats, like the Persian Empire lurking just over the horizon. Despite the romantic allure of his achievements, Philip's story is a reminder that power often comes with a price. His relentless pursuit of dominance wasn't just a personal ambition. It was a necessity in a world where hesitation meant annihilation. And while his methods were sometimes brutal, they were undeniably effective. So, here's to Philip Roman II, the king who turned military innovation into an art form and diplomacy into a high-stakes game of chess. He wasn't just building a kingdom. He was crafting a legacy that would set the stage for his son, Alexander, to conquer the known world. But that, dear friends, is a tale for another day. For now, let's appreciate the man who saw further with one eye than most could with two, and whose vision reshaped history. But before we dive headlong into the grandeur of Alexander's exploits, let's linger a bit longer on the stage set by Philip Roman II. You see, Philip didn't just leave behind a military powerhouse. He also crafted an economic machine that would make even modern-day CEOs crack a smile. And like any good business mogul, he knew that a diversified portfolio was key. Enter the gold mines of Mount Pangaeus, Philip's golden goose that laid the eggs of empire. These mines weren't just a stroke of luck. They were a strategic masterstroke. While some kings were content with collecting taxes and tribute, Philip went straight for the motherlode. Gold mines were nestled in the region of Thrace, which Philip had the foresight to annex. And boy, did they pay dividends. We're not talking about a few trinkets here and there. These mines were pumping out roughly 1,000 talents of gold annually. For those not fluent in ancient Greek accounting, that's about 26 metric tons of the shiny stuff each year. Enough to make even a miserly Scrooge McDuck dive into a vault. With this influx of wealth, Philip could fund his military escapades and ensure his soldiers were armed to the teeth. But it wasn't just about numbers, it was about power. With gold jingling in his pockets, Philip could grease the wheels of diplomacy, pay mercenaries, and most importantly, keep his troops loyal. After all, a soldier who's well paid is a happy soldier, or at least one less likely to stab you in the back. This financial prowess turned Macedon from a regional footnote into a headline-grabbing power player. Yet, let's not kid ourselves into thinking Philip was some kind of ancient-day Warren Buffett with a penchant for philanthropy. The reality was grittier. These mines weren't exactly OSHA-compliant. Miners toiled in dangerous conditions, and the sweat and blood of these workers were the unseen cost of Macedon's rise. But in a world where the phrase workers' rights didn't exist, this was par for the course. The romance of gold often glosses over the grimy hands that extract it, and Philip's era was no exception. Now, while gold might have been the lifeblood of Philip's empire, marriage was its connective tissue. Philip's matrimonial maneuvers were akin to strategic mergers in the corporate world today. He wasn't just collecting wives like stamps. Each union was a calculated step in a broader geopolitical chess game. Take his marriage to Olympias, the mother of Alexander, for instance. Olympias hailed from Epirus, a kingdom to the west of Macedon. This wasn't some romantic elopement. It was a shrewd alliance that secured his western flank and produced an heir who would become a household name. Philip's nuptial strategy expanded his influence across the Greek world and beyond. Each wedding was a social contract that brought new allies and territories under Macedonian sway. It was like a reality show with real-world consequences. Less The Bachelor, more Game of Thrones. But these marriages weren't exactly blissful unions. Tensions ran high, and palace intrigue was as thick as the Macedonian stew. Philip's domestic life was a hornet's nest of jealousies and power plays, adding a layer of complexity to his rule. Meanwhile, over in Athens, things were far from harmonious. Philip's relationship with the city was a roller coaster of admiration and animosity, a political tango that left both sides breathless and occasionally bruised. Athens, with its love of democracy and drama, viewed Philip with a mix of fear and fascination. They admired his military genius and economic savvy, but loathed his autocratic style. For Athens, Philip was the bad boy they couldn't resist, yet knew they shouldn't invite home for dinner. The Athenians were masters of rhetoric, and they didn't hold back in their critiques of Philip. The famous orator Demosthenes led the charge with a series of blistering speeches known as the Philippics, which painted Philip as a tyrant and a threat to Greek freedom. But Philip, ever the diplomat, knew how to play both sides. While some Athenians vilified him, others were more than willing to pocket his gold and accept his overtures of peace. It was a relationship defined by mutual suspicion, begrudging respect, and the occasional olive branch, sometimes literally. Yet behind this diplomatic dance was a harsh reality. For Philip, maintaining peace with Athens was less about friendship and more about strategy. He needed to keep the city-state in check while he focused on larger ambitions, like unifying Greece and preparing for a potential showdown with Persia. Athens, for its part, was caught between its ideals and the pragmatic need to coexist with a powerful neighbor. It was a precarious balance, and both sides knew that any misstep could lead to war. Despite the tensions, Philip's economic strategies and diplomatic prowess were undeniable. He was a master of realpolitik, understanding that in a world where might often made right, wealth could be just as potent a weapon as any sarissa. His ability to turn economic resources into political capital was a testament to his vision and cunning. But in a realm where fortunes could change as swiftly as the Mediterranean winds, Philip knew he couldn't afford to rest on his laurels or his gold. In the end, Philip's legacy is one of complexity and contradiction. He was a king who wielded power with both a velvet glove and an iron fist, a ruler who balanced ambition with pragmatism. His achievements set the stage for the conquests of his son, Alexander, yet they also highlight the gritty realities of ancient power dynamics. As we turn our gaze to the legacy of Macedon and its most famous offspring, remember that behind the legends and the luster, there lies a tale of raw ambition, calculated risk, and the relentless pursuit of power. So, as we leave Philip Roman II amid his golden dreams and tangled alliances, let's prepare to follow in the footsteps of his son. The stage is set, the players are primed, and the curtain is about to rise on a new chapter of history, a chapter that will see the Macedonian Empire soar to unprecedented heights. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's toast to Philip, the king who turned gold into glory and laid the groundwork for an empire that would stretch from Greece to the edges of the known world. So, as we leave Philip Roman II amid his golden dreams and tangled alliances, let's zoom in on another chapter of his reign, one that involves more than just swords and spears. Philip wasn't your typical monarch who viewed culture as little more than a backdrop to his military theater. No, he was a king with a penchant for the arts, a builder with an eye for architecture, and a patron who could appreciate the finer things in life, even while plotting his next territorial conquest. Was this flair for culture and infrastructure that laid the groundwork for what some might call a Macedonian Renaissance. First off, let's talk cities. Philip founded them like one might collect rare stamps, each carefully chosen for strategic and economic advantage. Take Philippi, for instance, named after himself, because why not? Located in Thrace, this city was more than just a vanity project. It was a linchpin in controlling the gold mines of Mount Pangaeus. Talk about smart real estate. Philippi wasn't just a military outpost. It was a bustling hub of commerce and culture, with theaters and markets that buzzed with activity. And you bet Philip had his eye on the box office revenue and trade tariffs. It was a 2-for-1 deal, cultural prestige and economic gain. But the real genius lay in how Philip used these cities to spread Hellenistic culture. Forget about the sword for a moment. Philip's real weapon was the Greek language and customs. By promoting Hellenistic ideals, he didn't just extend his political reach, he transformed Macedon into a cultural powerhouse. Greek became the lingua franca, and with it came the philosophies, dramas, and arts that defined the era. It was like turning Macedon into the ancient world's version of a cultural melting pot, minus the Instagram influencers. Let's not forget Philip's knack for fostering intellectual growth. He wasn't just building cities, he was building minds. Think of him as a kind of ancient-day Steve Jobs, but with more togas and fewer turtlenecks. He surrounded himself with thinkers and doers, people who could turn ideas into reality. Among these was Aristotle, the philosopher who would later teach Philip's son, Alexander. Philip understood the power of knowledge and innovation, and he wasn't afraid to invest in the intellectual capital that would propel Macedon, and later Alexander, to new heights. Speaking of Aristotle, let's delve into Philip's love for the arts and sciences. This wasn't just some casual affair, it was a full-blown romance. Philip was known to host intellectuals and artists at his court, creating a vibrant atmosphere where ideas could flourish. It wasn't just about patronizing artists for the sake of prestige. It was about fostering an environment where creativity could thrive. He understood that a kingdom wasn't just built on military might, but on the collective genius of its people. Imagine a royal court that was part think tank, part art gallery, with a dash of philosophical debate thrown in for good measure. And let's not overlook Philip's influence on infrastructure. Roads, bridges, and fortifications were the arteries of his kingdom, ensuring that troops and trade could move seamlessly across the landscape. These weren't just utilitarian projects, they were a statement of power and organization. Under Philip's reign, infrastructure wasn't just about connecting points A and B, it was about connecting people, ideas, and economies. He transformed Macedon from a patchwork quilt of isolated regions into a unified, well-oiled machine. Now, while all this sounds like a fairy tale of urban planning and cultural patronage, the reality was far more complex. Building cities and fostering culture required resources, lots of them. And while Philip's gold mines were a boon, they weren't a bottomless pit. The cost of maintaining his cultural and infrastructural projects was immense, and it often came at the expense of those lower down the social ladder. Taxation and labor obligations were the price of progress, and they weren't always met with open arms. The myth of Philip as a benevolent patron glosses over the harsh realities of his reign. Yes, he was a visionary, but he was also pragmatic to the core. His investments in culture and infrastructure were as much about consolidating power as they were about enlightenment. Every theater built, every philosopher patronized, was a step towards strengthening his grip on the kingdom. It was a delicate balancing act, walking the tightrope between cultural advancement and authoritarian control. But let's not kid ourselves. Philip's reign wasn't just about enlightened rule and artistic patronage. It was a period of transformation that set the stage for his son, Alexander, to leap from. Philip's Macedon was a launchpad, a cultural and economic powerhouse that would enable Alexander to embark on his legendary conquests. By the time Alexander took the throne, Macedon was ready to not just march, but to sprint across the known world. So, as we prepare to pass the baton to Alexander, let's appreciate the groundwork laid by Philip. His reign was a masterclass in blending culture, infrastructure, and power, a trifecta that would propel Macedon to unprecedented heights. But remember, behind the grandeur and glory, there was a gritty reality. Philip's achievements were built on a foundation of calculated risk and relentless ambition. As we shift our focus to Alexander, let's keep in mind the legacy left by a king who saw further with one eye than most could with two. The stage is set, and the world is about to witness the rise of an empire that will stretch from Greece to the very edges of the known world. But that, my friends, is a tale for another day. So, we've laid out the grand stage, and now it's time to dim the lights on Philip Roman II reign with a curtain call that's more drama than a Greek tragedy. You see, for all his military genius and diplomatic charm, Philip's life didn't end with a peaceful transition of power. No, it ended with the kind of intrigue and betrayal that would have made even the guards sit up and take notice. In 336 BCE, at the height of his powers, Philip was assassinated, and the theories surrounding his death are a veritable soap opera of family drama and political conspiracy. Let's set the scene. the royal palace in Igi, the ancient capital of Macedon. The occasion, the wedding of Philip's daughter, Cleopatra, to Alexander I of Epirus, an alliance that would secure Philip's western borders. A grand affair, with the who's who of Macedonian society in attendance. But amid the revelry, a storm was brewing, one that had been gathering for years. Philip, ever the showman, decided to make a grand entrance. But as he walked through the crowd, destiny, or perhaps vengeance, struck. One of his own bodyguards, Pausanias of Orstes, lunged forward and fatally stabbed Philip. And just like that, the king who had reshaped Macedon and molded it into a formidable power was struck down. Now here's where the plot thickens. Why would Pausanias, a trusted bodyguard, turn on Philip? Theories abound, and they are juicier than a Greek olive. One suggests personal vendetta. Pausanias, it seems, had a score to settle. He had been wronged by Attalus, a high-ranking Macedonian noble and Philip's ally, and believed the king had failed to avenge him. But revenge rarely has a single face. Another theory hints at political machinations. Was this a plot orchestrated by Olympias, Philip's fourth wife and mother of Alexander, to ensure her son's ascension? After all, family dynamics in the Macedonian court made today's reality TV look like a Sunday picnic. Then there's the whisper of external influence. Some speculate that foreign powers, wary of Philip's growing might and his plans to invade Persia, saw assassination as a means to destabilize Macedon. It's a tangled web of intrigue, with each thread leading to more questions than answers. But what's clear is this. Philip's murder wasn't just an isolated act of violence. It was the culmination of years of tension, both personal and political. But let's not be too hasty in donning our detective caps. While the theories are tantalizing, they also reflect a deeper truth about power. Rulers who play the high-stakes Game of Thrones often find themselves ensnared in a complex dance of loyalty and betrayal. Philip's assassination is a stark reminder that the very strategies that elevate us can also be our undoing. In the end, his death was as much a part of his legacy as his life's work. And speaking of legacy, let's not forget the mark Philip left on history. Yes, he's often overshadowed by his son, Alexander the Great, but Philip laid the foundation for the empire Alexander would go on to build. He didn't just unify Macedon, he transformed it into a military and economic powerhouse. His reforms in the army and his shrewd diplomacy were the bedrock of Macedon's expansion. Philip was a king who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be, and he had the audacity and the resources to make that vision a reality. Yet, behind the achievements lies a more sobering narrative. Philip's reign was a testament to the complexities of power, how it's gained, wielded, and ultimately lost. He was a man who understood that leadership was not just about conquest, but about crafting a cohesive state that could endure beyond his lifetime. His efforts paved the way for a new era in Greek history, one that would see the Hellenistic world emerge as a melting pot of cultures and ideas. But let's not romanticize his legacy too much. Philip was a ruler who operated in a world where might often equaled right. His consolidation of power involved not just strategic marriages and alliances, but also ruthless suppression of dissent. His vision of a united Greece was one achieved through both diplomacy and force, a duality that reflects the harsh realities of the ancient world. In the end, Philip's story is a reminder that history is as much about ambition and triumph as it is about the price paid for power. As the curtain falls on Philip II, we are left with a portrait of a king who was both a visionary and a pragmatist, a ruler whose life was as complex as the political landscape he navigated. His assassination was not just the end of a reign. It was the beginning of a new chapter in history, one that would see his son, Alexander, take the throne and embark on a campaign that would change the world. But as we prepare to turn the page, let's take a moment to appreciate the man who set the stage. A king who saw further with one eye than most could with two, and whose legacy, for better or worse, shaped the course of history. So, here's to Philip II, a king of contradictions and complexities, whose vision reshaped a kingdom and set the stage for an empire. As we step into the age of Alexander, remember that behind every great conqueror is a legacy forged by those who came before. Philip's reign may have ended in tragedy, but his impact endures, a testament to the enduring power of ambition and the relentless pursuit of greatness. In the dimly lit corridors of post-Roman Gaul, chaos reigned supreme. It was a time when the Roman Empire's mighty cloak had slipped off, leaving behind a patchwork quilt of ambitious chieftains, unruly tribes, and a teenage rebel who would eventually claim the title of Clovis, the first king of the Franks. You might think of him as the original influencer, except instead of hashtags, he used swords, and instead of a fan club, he had a war band. So, let's set the scene. It's 466 AD, and Gaul is less of a country and more of a chaotic free-for-all. The Romans had left behind a political vacuum, and everybody and their cousin was trying to fill it. Imagine trying to play Monopoly with no rules, and everyone's cheating. That's the kind of Wild West Clovis was born into. The Franks were just one of many groups scrabbling for a piece of the pie, and young Clovis was destined to sit at this very messy table. Clovis was part of the Merovingian dynasty, which sounds fancy, but don't let the name fool you. Picture a band of ambitious warriors rather than a polished royal family. Clovis's paps, Childeric I, was the king of the Salian Franks, a tribe that had carved out a niche in what is now northern France and Belgium. But Childeric was no saint. In fact, he got himself exiled for a bit, thanks to some scandalous behavior involving, shall we say, a few too many friendly encounters with the local ladies. His exile didn't last forever, though. He wiggled his way back to power, but by then, young Clovis was already soaking up lessons in both diplomacy and the dangers of overextending one's welcome. As a teenager, Clovis was thrust into a world where political alliances were as changeable as the weather in Brittany. He was only 15 when he took the reins from his father in 481 AD. Now, while most teens today are figuring out how to deal with acne and peer pressure, Clovis was strategizing how to unite a bunch of squabbling chieftains who couldn't agree on what to have for breakfast, let alone who should rule them. The political landscape of the time was like a chessboard where everyone was playing checkers. The Visigoths had set up shop in the southwest, the Burgundians were holding the southeast, and various other tribes darted the map like so many landmines. Clovis's first forays into power were marked by a cunning that would make any Machiavellian proud. He understood that sheer force wasn't enough. What he needed was a mix of charm, cunning, and if all else failed, the pointy end of a spear. One of the first things Clovis did was to look at his neighbors and see opportunities rather than threats. He figured the best way to deal with rivals was to either beat them or befriend them. His first significant military action was against Syagrius, the so-called king of the Romans, who controlled a small enclave in northern Gaul. Syagrius was a leftover from the Roman era, trying to keep the Roman dream alive in a world that had moved on. Clovis saw him as both a relic and a rival. In 486 AD, Clovis took him down in a battle that might as well have been called out with the old, in with the new. It was a decisive victory, and Syagrius was sent packing to the Visigoths, where he met an unfortunate end. Let's just say it wasn't a retirement party. With Syagrius out of the picture, Clovis had secured a major piece of the Gaulish puzzle, but he wasn't about to rest on his laurels. He knew that to unite the Franks, he had to play both the warrior and the politician. He married Clotilda, a Burgundian princess, in 493 AD, a move that was as strategic as any battle. She was a Christian, and while Clovis initially stuck to pagan beliefs, this marriage would plant the seeds for a religious conversion that would later reshape his kingdom. Clovis's knack for coalition building was legendary. He had a way of turning enemies into allies, often through a blend of military might and political savvy. He knew that uniting the Franks was like herding cats, but if anyone could do it, it was him. His ability to speak the language of both warrior and diplomat was key to his success. By the time he was in his mid-20s, Clovis had not only consolidated power among the Frankish tribes, but also set his sights on expanding beyond their territories. In those early years, Clovis was a man on a mission, driven by more than just youthful ambition. He was carving out a new identity for his people, one battle, one alliance at a time. It was a game of thrones, played out with real swords and real consequences. The young leader was setting the stage for a kingdom that would eventually stretch across much of modern-day France and beyond. As he looked out over his growing realm, Clovis must have known that his story was just beginning, and the history of Europe was about to take a dramatic turn. With the landscape of Gaul slowly bending to Clovis's will, his next move was as inevitable as a sequel to a runaway hit. Clovis was far from done with his expansion game plan. His victory over Syagrius was just the opening act. The real showstopper was yet to come, the Battle of Soissons in 486 AD, where Clovis would further cement his status as the Frankish powerhouse. Now, Soissons might not sound as glamorous as, say, the Battle of Hastings or Waterloo, but it was pivotal. Imagine a medieval rock concert where the main act is a showdown between the Franks and the last Roman holdouts. Clovis's opponent, Syagrius, was like the last Roman emperor wannabe, clinging to a dream that had long since turned to dust. The battle itself was a spectacle of swords and shields clashing, but let's not romanticize it too much. Medieval warfare was as gritty as it gets. Think less Braveheart and more Game of Thrones, without the CGI, just raw, unfiltered chaos. Clovis wasn't just a one-trick pony relying on brute force. His military strategies were as sharp as his blades. He employed a blend of cunning and charisma, persuading other Frankish chieftains to join his cause. It's like he had his own medieval LinkedIn, building a network of alliances that made his army not only bigger, but also more formidable. By the time Soissons rolled around, Clovis had a united front that Syagrius simply couldn't match. The battle itself was a game-changer, but it's not without its legends that have been polished by time. Take, for instance, the tale of the shattered vase. According to some accounts, after the battle, Clovis demanded the return of a valuable vase that had been looted. When one of his soldiers broke it in defiance, Clovis held his temper for a while. A year later, Clovis supposedly struck the man down with the words, "Thus you broke the vase at Soissons." It's a story that's too neat, too cinematic to be entirely true, but it highlights Clovis's flair for turning personal affronts into public lessons. What's often glossed over is the gritty reality of medieval logistics. Keeping an army fed and functional wasn't a stroll through the medieval park. It was more like a desperate scramble for resources. Medieval armies were less concerned with rations and more about raidings, such as liberating food and supplies from wherever they marched. Hygiene. Well, let's just say it was more of a suggestion than a practice. The scent of a medieval battlefield was a potent mix of sweat, blood, and the general odor of a group of men who hadn't seen a bath in weeks, not exactly the kind of detail that makes it into grand historical paintings. Clovis's victory at Soissons wasn't just a military triumph, it was a political masterstroke. It sent a clear message to the rest of Gaul: Clovis was the real deal. The Roman dream of dominance in Gaul was now officially over, and a new era was dawning. But Clovis wasn't just content with being the big man in Gaul, he had larger ambitions. His marriage to Clotilda wasn't just a love story for the ages, it was a strategic alliance that would later introduce the Christian element to his rule, a move that would ripple through his kingdom and beyond. While Clovis was busy turning battlefields into stepping stones for his empire, his ability to forge alliances was equally crucial. He wasn't just about the sword. He also knew when to extend the olive branch. His marriage to Clotilda brought him closer to the Burgundians, while other deals were struck with various tribes, often sealed with marriages and exchanges of hostages, a sort of medieval insurance policy. But let's not forget the less glamorous details of Clovis's campaign. Medieval warfare was as much about survival as it was about glory. Disease often killed more soldiers than battles did. Imagine trying to motivate your troops when the biggest threat wasn't the enemy, but dysentery. Despite these challenges, Clovis managed to keep his army intact and motivated, a testament to his leadership skills. In the grand tapestry of history, Clovis's military campaigns were more than just footnotes. They were the strokes of a master painter, crafting an empire from the chaos of post-Roman Europe. His victories weren't just about the territory gained. They reshaped the political and cultural landscape of the continent. From the Battle of Soissons to his deft diplomacy, Clovis was setting the stage for a Frankish kingdom that would one day become a cornerstone of European history. So, as we leave Clovis on the cusp of yet another campaign, take a moment to appreciate the grit and grime behind the glory. The legends of Clovis are compelling, but the realities he faced and overcame are what truly make him a figure worth remembering. The Frankish king was more than just a conqueror. He was a strategist, a diplomat, and a visionary, even if he did have a penchant for settling scores with a swing of his sword. Clovis's story is far from over, and as he continues to expand his realm, the plot thickens, setting the stage for the next chapter in the saga of a king who would unite the Franks and change the course of history. Now, as Clovis stood on the brink of yet another campaign, he found himself not just a king, but a legend in the making. Yet, even legends need a little divine backing from time to time. Enter the religious plot twist that would make any soap opera proud. In 496 AD, Clovis, the pagan warrior king, decided to take a leap of faith, literally, into the waters of Christianity. And no, this wasn't some existential crisis spurred by a midlife lack of purpose. It was a calculated move as strategic as any of his military campaigns. So why would the sword-wielding, battle-hardened king of the Franks suddenly decide to embrace a faith that preached turning the other cheek? Well, if you can't beat M, baptize M. Clovis realized that aligning himself with the Christian guard could offer political dividends that the old pagan guards simply couldn't match. At the time, Christianity was the unofficial club card to gain access to the former Roman elite, who still wielded substantial influence over the territories Clovis aimed to rule. This wasn't just about saving his soul, it was about saving face and securing power. Clotilda, Clovis's Christian wife, had been nudging him in this direction like a medieval life coach. She saw the potential for not just spiritual salvation, but also political consolidation. Clovis's conversion was the religious equivalent of marrying into the right family. Only this time, the family came with a built-in network of bishops, scribes, and a moral high ground that could be quite handy when you were trying to bring order to chaos. But let's not pretend divine intervention was the only factor. The Battle of Tolbiac against the Alemanni was a turning point. With his forces on the brink of defeat, Clovis reportedly called out to Christ for help, promising conversion in exchange for victory. Spoiler alert, he won. Now, whether you believe this was a holy miracle or just good timing, the outcome was the same. Clovis came out of the waters of baptism with a halo over his head and a political ace up his sleeve. The actual baptism took place in Rheims, a place that would later become synonymous with French coronations. Clovis was baptized by Saint Remigius, and in doing so, he wasn't just washing away his sins, but also scrubbing up his image. The move effectively rebranded him from a pagan warlord to a divinely sanctioned ruler, a transformation that opened doors to alliances with other Christian leaders, including the influential bishops who could rally the local populace better than any war cry. The Franks, initially resistant to the idea of worshipping a crucified god, were now encouraged to follow their king's lead, and many did, more out of loyalty than piety. This mass conversion was less about religious epiphanies and more about keeping up with Clovis's trend-setting ways. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of everyone suddenly wearing the same brand of sneakers because it's endorsed by their favorite celebrity. Only these sneakers came with a side of eternal salvation. For Clovis, the political benefits were immediate. By adopting Christianity, he gained the support of the Gallo-Roman aristocracy and ecclesiastical hierarchy, which were both integral to the governance of his newly expanded territories. It was like getting a VIP pass to the who's who of medieval Europe. Plus, it helped in his dealings with the Eastern Roman Empire, which viewed Christian kings as more legitimate and less likely to be a threat to their own Christian emperor. But let's not get too swept away by the romantic notion of a warrior king finding God. This was medieval politics, where divine right was often just a justification for very earthly ambitions. Clovis's conversion also conveniently dovetailed with his desire to solidify his rule over the Franks and beyond. By embracing Christianity, he was effectively laying the groundwork for what would become the Frankish Empire, and later, the Holy Roman Empire. Talk about a domino effect. Despite the spiritual veneer, the conversion did not fundamentally change Clovis's approach to rule. He still wielded the sword as effectively as ever, expanding his territories and subduing rival tribes. But now, each conquest came with a side of sanctity, as Clovis framed his wars as righteous crusades to spread the Christian faith. The Alemanni, the Visigoths, and even his former Burgundian in-laws found themselves on the receiving end of this new, divinely sanctioned aggression. In the grand scheme of things, Clovis's baptism was less about the purity of faith and more about the purity of power. It was a masterstroke that not only secured his legacy, but also set the stage for the Carolingian dynasty. The man who had once been a pagan warrior became the progenitor of a line that would produce Charlemagne, the emperor who would unite much of Western Europe centuries later. So, while Clovis's conversion to Christianity might be wrapped in the shiny packaging of divine intervention, peel back the layers, and you'll find a story as old as politics itself. A leader using every tool at his disposal, sword, marriage, and now religion, to carve out a kingdom from the chaos. And in doing so, he set a precedent for future rulers who would follow in his footsteps, wielding both the cross and the sword as instruments of power. As we leave Clovis, standing in his newly polished Christian armor, remember that the story of his conversion is as much a tale of political savvy as it is one of spiritual awakening. The king who once relied on the sword now found strength in the symbol of the cross, a transformation that would forever change the landscape of Europe and the history of the world. But don't get too comfortable. There are more twists in this tale, and Clovis's story is far from over. Let's see what the newly baptized king has in store for us next as he continues to stitch together the patchwork quilt of his burgeoning empire. As Clovis stood in his metaphorical Christian armor, ready to tackle the next chapter of his ambitious saga, he might have realized that winning battles was the easy part. The real challenge, crafting a legacy that would outlast him, one that wouldn't crumble like stale bread once he was gone. Enter the Salic law and Clovis's attempts at turning his fledgling kingdom into a well-oiled machine. Now, don't expect a Magna Carta-style document, all neat and tidy. The Salic law was more of a medieval mashup of legal codes, a bit like trying to create a playlist from a stack of scratched vinyl records. Officially named Lex Salica, this collection of laws was as much about property and inheritance as it was about keeping the peace among a bunch of war-happy nobles with itchy sword hands. We're talking about a time when your average legal dispute wasn't settled with a courtroom drama, but often with a duel or, if you were lucky, a hefty fine. Clovis, ever the strategic thinker, knew that if he was going to hold onto his hard-won territories, he needed more than just brute force. He needed a rulebook. The Salic law was his attempt to create some semblance of order. You see, in Clovis's world, property was power, and Salic law was all about who got to call dibs on the land and wealth. And let's not kid ourselves, it was also about ensuring Clovis's family stayed top dog. After all, what's the point of conquering half of Europe if your descendants can't hold on to it? One of the most famous elements of this legal code was the exclusion of women from inheriting land or titles. While this might sound like the medieval version of a no girls allowed sign, it served a purpose. Clovis was well aware that land disputes could tear a kingdom apart faster than you can say civil war. By keeping inheritance strictly in the male line, he aimed to prevent the parceling out of his lands like slices of pie at a family reunion. It was about keeping the kingdom intact, and more importantly, under Merovingian control. But let's not paint Clovis as a proto-feminist icon. The Salic law wasn't exactly progressive. It was more a strategic maneuver to keep power concentrated in the hands of those he trusted, or at least those he could keep an eye on. The law covered everything from theft to murder, with fines meticulously catalogued like a medieval price list. Stole a pig, that'll be a few solidi. Committed murder, cough up 100, and maybe we'll call it even. While the Salic law might sound like an attempt at order, it was also a PR move worthy of any modern spin doctor. By establishing a legal code, Clovis projected an image of a ruler who brought civilization to the barbarian masses. It was like saying, look, we Franks are no mere marauders. We have laws and everything. This was crucial for Clovis's image, especially when dealing with the more refined Romanized parts of his empire. He had to be seen as a legitimate ruler, not just a glorified gang leader with a crown. The Salic law also doubled as a handy tool for wealth redistribution, medieval style. Fines collected from crimes didn't just disappear into a void. They went into the royal coffers, helping to fund further military campaigns and keep the nobles happy with a bit of coin. It was a clever way of using the law to grease the wheels of governance, ensuring that Clovis's reign wasn't just powerful, but profitable. Of course, the law was only as good as its enforcement, and in a time before centralized police forces, this was no small feat. Clovis relied on a network of local chieftains and nobles to uphold his edicts, a delicate balancing act of loyalty and fear. Keeping these local powerhouses in line was like juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle on a tightrope with no safety net. One misstep, and the whole operation could come crashing down. This brings us to another crucial aspect of Clovis's governance, his knack for image management. In the grand tradition of rulers throughout history, Clovis knew that perception was reality. The Salic law was part of a broader effort to cement his legacy, ensuring that his name would echo through the ages. He wasn't just building a kingdom, he was crafting a dynasty, and for that, he needed to be seen as both a warrior and a wise ruler. Clovis's conversion to Christianity, his legal reforms, and his military successes all fed into this narrative. He wasn't just the king of the Franks, he was the architect of a new order, one that could rival the grandeur of Rome. By codifying laws, spreading his newfound faith, and wielding power with a mix of fear and favor, Clovis was doing more than just ruling. He was laying the foundation for what would become one of the most influential dynasties in European history. Yet, even as Clovis worked to ensure his legacy, the realities of medieval rule were never far from the surface. Disease, famine, and the ever-present threat of rebellion meant that his reign required constant vigilance. The Salic law, for all its ambition, was not a panacea. It was a tool, one among many, that Clovis wielded with the skill of a master craftsman. As we delve deeper into the intricacies of Clovis's rule, it's clear that his story is more than just a tale of conquest and conversion. It's a story of transformation, of a king who turned chaos into order, who wielded both the sword and the pen to forge a kingdom from the ashes of a fallen empire. Clovis's reign was a tightrope walk between tradition and innovation, a balancing act that would shape the course of history for generations to come. So, as we pause to catch our breath in this whirlwind tour of Clovis's life, remember that the story isn't over yet. The king who had once been a pagan warrior was now a lawmaker and a Christian ruler, navigating the treacherous waters of medieval politics with a combination of brute force and cunning diplomacy. And as we look ahead to the next chapter, we can only wonder what other surprises Clovis has in store. Stay tuned, because this saga is far from over, and the Merovingian dynasty is just getting started. As we teeter on the brink of concluding Clovis's roller coaster of a reign, let's take a moment to savor the irony. A warlord-turned-Christian king who codified laws and built an empire from the chaos of post-Roman Europe. It's a tale as tangled as a medieval tapestry, and the threads of his legacy continue to weave through history like an unending ballad. But how did Clovis, a man who spent much of his life swinging swords and sealing deals, become more than just a footnote in the annals of European history? Let's unravel this myth-making machine and see how his descendants kept the Clovis brand alive, and why it mattered. First, let's address the Merovingian dynasty, Clovis's not-so-humble bragging rights. His descendants took the image of their patriarch and polished it to a sheen that would make any PR agent proud. Clovis was painted as a warrior king blessed by divine right, a narrative that conveniently glossed over the less glamorous details of his climb to power. This mythologizing wasn't just for kicks. It was a political tool, a way to legitimize authority in an era when legitimacy was as slippery as a greased pig. The Merovingians were masters at this game, turning Clovis into a symbol of unity and divine favor, even as they squabbled among themselves for power. And squabble they did, often with a familial fervor that could rival any modern soap opera. The Salic law, with its clear-cut rules of male inheritance, didn't eliminate power struggles. It merely set the stage for new ones. Clovis's descendants spent as much time fighting each other as they did their external enemies, ensuring that the Merovingian brand was as much about internal drama as it was about external conquests. Yet, despite, or perhaps because of, these internal conflicts, the image of Clovis as the great unifier endured. It was a narrative that provided a veneer of stability in a world where chaos was always lurking just beyond the horizon. Of course, Clovis's legacy wasn't confined to France. His reign set the stage for the Frankish expansion that would eventually evolve into the Carolingian Empire, a medieval powerhouse under Charlemagne. The transformation from a loose confederation of tribes to a centralized empire didn't happen overnight, but Clovis's groundwork made it possible. By establishing legal frameworks and religious unity, he gave his successors the tools to build on his foundation. Frankish Empire became a beacon of stability in a fractured Europe, and Clovis's shadow loomed large over it all. Now, Let's fast forward a millennium or so and ask the burning question. How would Clovis fare in today's world of 24-hour news cycles and social media madness? Picture a king who thrived on the sword and the sermon, suddenly thrust into a world where your latest tweet can make or break you. Clovis would probably have a field day with the internet, using it to craft a carefully curated image that combined his warrior ethos with his divine right to rule. Imagine the hashtags: #BattleReady, #divinely sanctioned, #King Goals. His conversion to Christianity would be a viral moment, complete with a YouTube baptism livestream and perhaps a guest appearance on a medieval-themed reality show. But let's not kid ourselves. Clovis's world was one where power was absolute and dissent was dealt with decisively. In today's more egalitarian society, where public opinion can turn on a dime, his methods might not get the same applause. The fine line between strong leadership and tyranny would be a tightrope walk for a man who wasn't exactly known for his patience with opposing views. Yet, his knack for alliances and image management would likely serve him well. In an era where perception often trumps reality, Clovis's ability to manipulate both would make him a formidable player. And as we draw our deep dive into Clovis's world to a close, let's spare a thought for the man behind the myth. Clovis wasn't just a king. He was a craftsman, sculpting a legacy from the raw materials of war, religion, and law. His story is a testament to the power of transformation, a reminder that even the most chaotic of times can give rise to order, and that sometimes the line between legend and reality is as blurred as a medieval manuscript. So the next time you hear Clovis's name, remember that behind the legend was a man who played the long game, and in doing so, changed the course of history. In the final analysis, Clovis's life was a tapestry of contradictions: the pagan who embraced Christianity, the warrior who codified laws, and the conqueror who united a kingdom. His legacy is a reminder that history is as much about the stories we tell as it is about the facts we uncover. So, whether you're a history buff or just someone who stumbled into this tale, take a moment to appreciate the complexities of Clovis's world. It's a story that has survived the sands of time, woven into the very fabric of European history. A story that's as relevant today as it was over a millennium ago. And with that, dear listener, our journey through the life and legacy of Clovis, the first king of the Franks, comes to a close. Thanks for sticking around. And remember, history might be in the past, but its lessons are always in the present. Once upon a time, let's say between 800 AD and 1600 AD, there was a bustling civilization sprawling across what we now call the southeastern United States. We're talking the ancient Mississippian culture, a powerhouse of society long before anyone could argue over the best barbecue sauce. This was a network of city-states where pyramids of earth, rather than stone, rose majestically over the floodplains. It was a place rich in agriculture, trade, and societal complexities that would make today's office politics look like a kindergarten playdate. Let's get one thing straight. Women were not simply hanging out on the sidelines of this ancient world. Far from it. They were the unsung CEOs of the agricultural sector, the ones who kept the wheels turning while everyone else was busy with their heads in the clouds. Literally, if you count those mound-building projects. Imagine a world where the three sisters, maize, beans, and squash, were the bread and butter, or rather, the corn and legumes of survival. Spoiler alert, it was the women who ensured these crops didn't just survive, but thrived. Now, if you're picturing a bunch of people in feathered headdresses dancing around a campfire, hold that thought, and then toss it right out the window. The Mississippian women were more like the original multitasking champions. They didn't just plant seeds and walk away. They were navigating a complex division of labor that would make today's work-life balance look like a walk in the park. And while we're on the subject, don't romanticize this as some idyllic commune where everyone was holding hands and singing cumbia. The reality was more like a high-stakes game of Jenga with Mother Nature as the unpredictable player. The Mississippians were agricultural innovators. The Three Sisters weren't just a catchy name. They were an ingenious planting strategy that involved growing maize, beans, and squash together in a symbiotic relationship. Maize provided a structure for the beans to climb, beans returned nitrogen to the soil, and squash spread out to block weeds. It was like having your cake, eating it, and using it to bake another cake all at the same time. And who was at the helm of this agricultural ship? Women. They were the ones who made sure the fields were fertile, the crops were bountiful, and the community was fed. But let's not sugarcoat it. This wasn't a utopia where every day was sunny and breezy. The work was grueling, a full-body workout that would make your gym's CrossFit class look like a nap. From dawn till dusk, they were out there planting, weeding, and harvesting. And they did it all without the luxury of modern conveniences like tractors, pesticides, or a Spotify playlist to make the hours fly by. Yet, these women were the backbone of a society that couldn't afford to falter. In a culture that spanned hundreds of miles and varied environments, from the hot and humid Mississippi Delta to the cooler reaches of the Appalachian foothills, women had to be as adaptable as they were resilient. It was a bit like being a one-woman show, juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. And just like in any good performance, the show had to go on, no matter the weather, the season, or the occasional flood that Mother Nature decided to throw into the mix. Their expertise wasn't just in growing food, it was in maintaining a delicate balance of resources and labor. The division of labor in Mississippian culture was as complex as a modern-day corporate org chart. Men typically handled hunting and defense, while women managed the agricultural duties. This arrangement might seem traditional, but it was anything but static. Women held a central role in ensuring the community's survival and prosperity, a role that gave them a significant say in the social and economic decisions of their communities. And here's the kicker. This wasn't just about survival. It was about crafting a lifestyle that allowed for trade, art, and culture to flourish. The surplus of food produced by these industrious women meant that not everyone had to be tied to the fields. This surplus fueled trade networks that stretched across the continent, bringing exotic goods like copper from the Great Lakes and shells from the Gulf Coast into the heart of Mississippian lands. It was a bit like a bustling flea market, except instead of bargaining over vintage records, you were trading for life-sustaining resources. So, the next time you hear someone wax poetic about the noble savage or the peaceful pre-Columbian societies, remember that the reality was a bit more nuanced. Women in the Mississippian culture were the dynamic force that kept the community thriving. They were the original multitaskers, balancing the demands of agriculture with the needs of their families and communities. And while they didn't have to deal with office meetings or email chains, their daily lives were filled with an equally daunting list of tasks that required skill, patience, and a fair bit of grit. In the end, the story of the Mississippian women is a testament to the power of adaptability and resilience. They were more than just caretakers of the land. They were stewards of a culture that has long since disappeared but whose legacy can still be felt today. And if that doesn't make you want to tip your hat to these ancient powerhouses, I don't know what will. Now, let's pivot from the fields to the halls of power, or should I say, the earthwork mounds of authority. You see, if you thought women in Mississippian culture were just the backbone of agriculture, you'd only be halfway there. They were also the glue holding the social and political framework together. In a society where lineage and inheritance were traced through the mother's line, women had a say in matters that would make today's boardroom negotiations look like a game of checkers. Yes, we're diving into the fascinating world of matrilineal societies where, surprise, surprise, women wielded significant influence. First off, let's get one thing straight about matrilineal societies. It wasn't a free-for-all where women ruled with an iron fist, or in this case, a corn stalk. The power dynamics were complex, almost like a game of chess where every move could shift the balance of power. Clan leadership, for example, often resided with the elder women who were like the family's CEOs, making decisions that affected everything from marriage alliances to land use. Imagine a system where your great-aunt Gertrude could decide the fate of the family fortune. Terrifying, perhaps, but in the Mississippian world it worked. Now, let's talk about the political influence of these women. The Mississippian culture was organized into chiefdoms, think city-states with their own ruling elites, while the top positions, like the Great Sun or Paramount Chief, were often held by men. These roles were typically filled through matrilineal lines. This meant that women had significant influence over who got to wear the proverbial crown, so to speak. And here's the kicker. The power wasn't just in the appointment, but also in the council. Women of high status often served as advisors, using their extensive knowledge of the clan's needs and alliances to shape policy. So, if you thought the idea of a female political advisor was a modern concept, Think again. But let's not get carried away with the idea of a feminist utopia. The reality was a mixed bag. Yes, women had influence, but they were also navigating a political landscape where men often held the more visible roles. It was a bit like being the director behind the scenes, pulling the strings and making the magic happen while someone else took the bow. And let's be honest, every society has its myths and legends, often romanticizing the balance of power. The truth was more nuanced, with a shared governance that required negotiation, compromise, and sometimes a good dose of cunning. Take the role of the clan mother, for instance. She was often responsible for maintaining the clan's lineage and ensuring that resources were distributed fairly. Her influence was felt not just within the family, but throughout the community. It was her job to maintain the social fabric, deciding when and where alliances should be made or broken. If you've ever tried to plan a family reunion, you know that's no small feat. Now imagine doing it on a scale that affects thousands of people, and you start to get the picture. So, what does this all mean for our understanding of gender roles in ancient societies? Well, it debunks the myth that leadership was solely a male domain. It shows that power was more fluid, often shared, and based on a complex interplay of social and familial ties. It's a reminder that history is full of surprises, challenging our modern assumptions about who held the reins of power. And here's a little tidbit that might surprise you. The Mississippian culture's emphasis on matrilineal inheritance meant that women were often the keepers of property and wealth. Land, after all, was passed down through the female line, ensuring that women had a vested interest in the economic and social stability of their communities. It was a bit like being a shareholder in a company, with a say in how things were run and a responsibility to ensure its success. In today's political landscape, we often talk about breaking glass ceilings and achieving gender equality. But in the Mississippian world, women were already making strides in ways that might surprise us. They were the quiet powerhouses, the unsung heroes of their time, ensuring that their communities thrived in a world that was as unpredictable as it was vast. And while we might not have direct records of their voices, the legacy of these women is felt in the archaeological evidence they left behind. From the intricate designs of pottery that speak to a rich cultural life, to the remains of ancient trade routes that highlight their role in economic networks, the story of Mississippian women is one of resilience, adaptability, and quiet strength. So, as we delve deeper into this history, let's keep in mind that the narrative of male-dominated leadership is a myth that needs debunking. The reality was far more complex, with women playing a crucial role in shaping the political, economic, and social structures of their society. As we move forward, we'll continue to explore how these dynamics played out in everyday life, revealing the intricate tapestry of a civilization that was as advanced as it was fascinating. Speaking of intricate tapestries, let's weave our way into the spiritual and cultural dimensions of Mississippian society, where women weren't just background singers in the choir of life. They were the lead vocalists belting out the high notes. Picture them as the spiritual DJs of the time, spinning the hits of oral tradition and religious practices like nobody's business. In the Mississippian world, spiritual life wasn't a Sunday affair. It was woven into the very fabric of daily existence. And women, they were the priestesses, the keepers of the sacred Spotify playlist, if you will. Their role in religious practices was as dynamic as it was essential. They didn't just light candles or chant in the background. They were front and center, leading rituals that would make any modern meditation class look like a nap in comparison. Let's dive into the archaeological evidence, those dusty breadcrumbs that lead us back to the past. Picture this: effigy pottery and artifacts that whisper tales of women's spiritual roles. These pieces aren't just decorative items you'd find on a boho chic Pinterest board. Nope, they're the ancient version of a spiritual Instagram post, capturing the essence of cultural significance. Take, for instance, the famous weeping eye motif found on pottery. It's not just a pretty design. It's a symbol deeply tied to religious practices, reflecting the eye of the great serpent, a deity that underscores the spiritual narrative of the Mississippian people. These artifacts reveal that women were key players in these spiritual narratives, their hands shaping the tools of worship and their voices echoing in the chants that filled the air. And let's not forget the oral tradition, a sort of ancient podcast, if you will, where stories of creation, morality, and the cosmos were passed down like family heirlooms. Women were the storytellers, the custodians of cultural memory, weaving tales that were both moral compasses and entertainment. In a world without Netflix, these stories were the blockbuster hits, shaping how communities understood their place in the universe and guiding them through life's complexities. It's a bit like having your grandmother tell you the story of Little Red Riding Hood, but with a twist, because in these tales, the wolves could be the spirits of ancestors or the embodiment of natural forces. Now, let's address the myth of the passive priestess, the idea that women in religious roles were merely ornamental. The reality, they were more like the spiritual CEOs, wielding influence that reached beyond the altar. They played a crucial role in decision-making processes that affected the entire community. Whether it was determining the timing of a harvest or mediating disputes, their spiritual insights were sought after and respected. And in what might be the ultimate plot twist, their spiritual authority often translated into social and political clout. Who knew that the pathway to power sometimes lay through the realm of the divine? Let's draw some parallels to modern spiritual leaders. Today's spiritual influencers, from Deepak Chopra to opera's Super Soul Sunday guests, owe a nod to these ancient women who laid the groundwork for what it means to be a spiritual guide. The Mississippian priestesses were the original life coaches, guiding their communities through the ups and downs with wisdom and grace. They didn't have a social media following, but they did have the hearts and minds of their people, and that was just as powerful. But let's not romanticize this as an egalitarian utopia where everyone held hands and sang Kumbaya in perfect harmony. The spiritual landscape was as fraught with challenges as any other aspect of life. Power dynamics, human ambition, and social hierarchies played their part, making it a complex web of influence and authority. Yet, within this intricate network, women found ways to assert their power and influence, reminding us that spirituality and leadership are not mutually exclusive. So, as we delve further into this fascinating chapter of history, let's keep in mind the remarkable contributions of these women. They were the weavers of stories, the keepers of sacred knowledge, and the leaders in rituals that shaped the spiritual consciousness of their communities. Their legacy is etched in the artifacts they left behind, in the stories that survived the passage of time, and in the very soil of the mounds that once echoed with their voices. In the grand tapestry of history, the role of women in Mississippian culture is a vibrant thread, a reminder that power and influence come in many forms. Whether through the spiritual, the social, or the political, these women were a force to be reckoned with, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire and challenge our understanding of the past. As we continue to unravel this narrative, let's celebrate the complexity and richness of a history that has much to teach us about the resilience and adaptability of the human spirit. And speaking of resilience and adaptability, let's take a stroll down the bustling boulevards of ancient trade networks. Don't picture a dusty market square filled with the clamor of bartering merchants just yet. Instead, think of a sprawling web of economic activity that will give our modern supply chains a run for their money. In this case, their shells and copper. Women in Mississippian society weren't just the agricultural maestros. They were also the economic powerhouses driving trade networks that spanned from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast. Imagine them as the original supply chain managers, except their inventory was a mix of handmade pottery, intricately woven textiles, and other crafted goods that were as valuable as any luxury item on today's market. Let's start with pottery, the ancient equivalent of Etsy's handcrafted treasures. Mississippian women were deft artisans, creating pottery with designs so intricate you'd think they had a fine arts degree. Archaeological digs have unearthed pottery shards adorned with motifs that weren't just pretty to look at, they were cultural currency. These pieces were as good as gold, traded over hundreds of miles. Picture a pot that started its life in Cahokia, Illinois, and found its way into a household in what's now Florida. That's one heck of a travel itinerary for a piece of clay. And then there were the textiles. Now, these weren't your run-of-the-mill blankets or tunics. We're talking about finely woven fabrics that could rival the quality of a modern luxury brand scarf. Made from plant fibers and dyed with natural pigments, these textiles were crafted with precision and care. They were products of a meticulous process that would make a modern fashionista swoon. And the kicker, these textiles weren't just for keeping warm, They were status symbols, traded far and wide, demonstrating the weaver's skill and the trader's reach. Now, let's zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture. These trade networks were the arteries of the Mississippian economy, pulsating with the flow of goods and ideas. Goods moved along routes that snaked through forests, over rivers, and across plains. Copper from the Great Lakes, marine shells from the Gulf Coast, and even mica from the Appalachian Mountains all found their way into the heart of Mississippian society, exchanged for the pottery and textiles women produced. You might be wondering how a society without the wheel or draft animals managed to create such an extensive trade network. The answer lies in the human spirit of ingenuity and collaboration. Canoes navigated the rivers, and porters trekked overland routes, forming a complex web of connections that linked communities across vast distances. It was a logistical masterpiece, akin to Amazon Prime, but without the 2-day shipping guarantee. And here's a plot twist for the ages. These trade routes weren't just about goods. They were conduits for cultural exchange, carrying not only tangible items, but also ideas, stories, and traditions. Women, as the primary producers of these tradable goods, were at the heart of this cultural symbiosis. They were the silent diplomats, fostering connections and alliances that transcended the boundaries of their immediate communities. Now, let's tackle a myth that loves to linger. The idea that ancient trade was a peaceful exchange of goods over a handshake and a smile. The reality was a tad more complicated. Trade could be fraught with tension, a delicate dance of negotiation where misunderstandings could escalate into conflicts. The Mississippian trade networks were no exception. They required careful diplomacy and a keen understanding of the complex web of relationships between different groups. Women, with their role in crafting and trading goods, were often at the forefront of these negotiations, their craftsmanship speaking as eloquently as any diplomat's words. In modern terms, you could say these women were the original networkers, leveraging their skills and products to build bridges between cultures. They understood the power of a well-crafted part or a beautifully woven textile to open doors and create lasting connections. Their economic influence was both a testament to their skill and a demonstration of the Mississippian society's reliance on trade as a vital component of its prosperity. So, as we unravel this tapestry of history, let's give a nod to the women who were more than just artisans. They were the architects of an economic system that connected distant lands and diverse cultures. They remind us that trade isn't just about goods, it's about people, their stories, and their shared humanity. In a world where borders were fluid and connections were paramount, these women were the unsung heroines of an ancient global network, weaving together a society that thrived on the strength of its diversity and the resilience of its people. And as we wrap up this segment of our journey, let's remember that the story doesn't end here. We've only just begun to explore the depths of the Mississippian trade networks and the pivotal role women played. There's more to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more stories to tell. So, stay tuned as we continue to peel back the layers of history, revealing the vibrant and complex world of the Mississippian culture, where women were not just participants but pivotal players in the grand narrative of human history. And if you thought we'd covered all there is to say about the Mississippian women, think again. We've barely scratched the surface of their multidimensional roles. Sure, they were the economic engines and spiritual guides, but their legacy stretches beyond the confines of their time, challenging our modern assumptions about gender roles and societal structures. Let's start with the age-old myth that ancient societies were all about patriarchal dominance, with women as mere footnotes. The Mississippian culture throws a delightful wrench in that narrative. Here, women were not just supporting actors in a male-centric drama. They were central figures, wielding influence that would make any modern-day power broker take notes. Picture this, a society where women were not just the backbone of agriculture, but also the brains behind trade negotiations and key decision-makers in social and political spheres. It's like discovering an entire chapter of history that's been hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to dust off the cover and dive in. Now, why does this matter, you ask? Because it forces us to rethink the rigid gender roles we've been spoon-fed throughout history. It's like finding out that the plot twist in your favorite movie was right there all along, and you just didn't see it. The Mississippian women balanced their influence across various domains, From the domestic sphere to governance, they were the original jugglers of power and responsibility. And they did it without the luxury of social media rants or hashtags to champion their cause. Let's dig into some hard facts to underscore their legacy. Archaeological finds, like those in Cahokia, reveal that women played a significant role in shaping cultural and economic landscapes. Evidence suggests that some of the most elaborate pottery and textiles, essential to trade and social status, were produced by women. The significance: these items were not just commodities, they were symbols of cultural identity and economic power. Imagine a modern economy where handbags and haute couture drive the GDP. Now, replace Gucci with intricately crafted parts, and you've got a glimpse into the Mississippian world. But let's not get carried away with romanticizing this as a feminist utopia. The reality was far more nuanced. Women operated within a social structure that required negotiation, cunning, and sometimes compromise. They were not immune to the challenges of power dynamics and social hierarchies. Think of them as master chess players, anticipating the moves of their opponents while planning their next strategic victory. It's a reminder that history is not just a collection of dates and events, but a complex web of human interactions and ambitions. So, what can contemporary society learn from these ancient powerhouses? First, that influence doesn't always come with a title or a crown. In the Mississippian culture, women wielded power through their expertise, creativity, and ability to negotiate complex social and economic landscapes. It's a lesson in the value of adaptability and resilience, traits that are just as important today as they were a millennium ago. Secondly, the Mississippian women teach us about the importance of revisiting historical narratives. Too often, history is written by the victors, or in many cases, by those with the loudest voices. By peeling back the layers of myth and legend, we uncover stories that challenge our understanding of gender roles and societal structures. It's like realizing that the history book you've been reading all your life was missing a few crucial chapters, and now you're finally getting the full story. And let's not forget the enduring legacy of these women in shaping the cultural memory of their descendants. Their influence can be traced through the oral traditions and artifacts that speak to a rich cultural tapestry of resilience and creativity. In a world where cultural heritage is often overlooked or undervalued, the story of the Mississippian women is a testament to the power of cultural continuity and the importance of preserving the narratives of those who came before us. As we wrap up this exploration of the Mississippian women, let's tip our hats to these ancient trailblazers. They were more than just historical footnotes. They were architects of their society, crafting a legacy that continues to inspire and challenge us today. In a world where the narratives of the past are often simplified or romanticized, their story is a reminder of the complexity and richness of human history. So, the next time you find yourself pondering the past, remember the Mississippian women. They were the quiet powerhouses, the skilled negotiators, and the cultural custodians of their time. Their legacy is a vibrant thread in the tapestry of history, a testament to the enduring power of resilience and adaptability. And as we continue to explore the depths of the past, let's keep in mind the lessons they have to teach us about the balance of power, the fluidity of gender roles, and the importance of revisiting and revising the stories we tell ourselves about our shared human journey. Sun's barely crept over the horizon, and already there's a glint of mischief in the air, bouncing off the obsidian tools that are crucial to your craft. Welcome to a typical morning in an ancient Mesoamerican village where pottery isn't just an art form, it's a lifeline. You stretch, feeling the aches of yesterday's labor, knowing that today will be no less demanding. Pottery here isn't about spinning wheels and delicate brushes. It's about grit, sweat, and a little bit of magic. Let's start with the basics: clay and temper. These aren't just fancy terms tossed around in artisan circles. They're the bread and butter of your trade. Without them, your parts would be as flimsy as a modern-day New Year's resolution. Clay, as you know, is your primary ingredient, but it doesn't just spring up from the ground like daisies. Nope, you're going to have to go on a little adventure to get it, and that's why your first stop is the riverbank. Now, you might be wondering why you're trekking all the way to the river. Well, clay is a picky substance. It likes to hide in places where water has done its magic, washing away impurities and leaving behind a fine, sticky residue that's just perfect for pottery. Think of it as nature's way of pre-filtering your raw materials. Plus, it's not like you can pop into the local Mesoamerican Home Depot and grab a bag off the shelf. So, off you go, with a basket and a prayer, hoping the river's been generous. If luck's on your side, you'll find rich deposits of clay, maybe a couple of kilometers from the village. Easy, right? Except for the fact that carrying back a load of wet clay isn't exactly a walk in the park. It's more like a workout that'd make a CrossFit enthusiast weep. But that's not all you need. Enter temper, the unsung hero of pottery. Temper is what stops your parts from cracking under pressure, literally. It could be sand, volcanic ash, or even ground-up bits of broken pottery, because recycling was a thing long before it was trendy. The choice of temper depends on what's lying around, which means you're also keeping an eye out for whatever nature's left at your doorstep. Now, let's talk techniques. Once you've lugged your precious haul back to the village, it's time to get your hands dirty. And when I say dirty, I mean really dirty. The clay needs to be kneaded and pounded, not unlike a baker preparing dough. Only this dough requires every bit of your strength. You have to mix it with temper, creating a blend that's tough enough to withstand the kiln's fiery embrace. All this effort is part of a larger economic tapestry. Pottery isn't just for holding water or grains, it's a currency of its own. Parts are traded, gifted, and even offered to the gods. Each piece carries the weight of its creation and the value of its future purpose. Your work connects you to the economic pulse of the village, a pulse that beats with every trade and transaction. And let's not forget the politics of pottery. A good part can elevate your standing, while a bad one can tarnish your reputation faster than you can say, broken shard. The community relies on your skills not just for practicality, but for prestige. After all, a well-crafted part is a status symbol as much as it is a utility. In the grand scheme of things, today's tasks might seem mundane, but they're anything but. You're part of a lineage that stretches back centuries, shaping the cultural and economic landscape of Mesoamerica. Every piece you create is a testament to your skill and resilience, a small yet significant contribution to the world around you. As you look at the raw materials before you, glistening with potential, it's clear that you're not just making pottery. You're crafting history, one part at a time. So take a deep breath, roll up your sleeves, and get ready to transform Earth into art. The day is young, and there's much work to be done. So, with your raw materials prepped and ready, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of shaping that clay. Forget the cinematic twirl of a potter's wheel. Hollywood might love it, but ancient Mesoamerica had a different game plan. Instead of relying on some fancy spinning contraption, you're going old school with coil building techniques. It's a process that's as much about artistry as it is about sheer physical endurance. Let's be honest, working with clay is no walk in the park. It's more like a marathon without the cheering crowds or finish line glory. You start by rolling out a long, snake-like coil of clay, which sounds like a fun arts and crafts activity, until you realize you're doing this for hours, and your arms are staging a rebellion. Each coil is carefully stacked and smoothed, layer by layer, until your part starts to take shape. It's a bit like building a cake, except you can't eat your mistakes. Now let's talk tools. Forget about intricate brushes or high-tech gadgets. Your toolkit is as minimalist as it gets. Think smooth stones, gourds, and maybe a bit of shell for good measure. These are your humble instruments, turning what could be a lump of dirt into something that'll hold water, corn, or maybe even the odd sacrificial offering. And if you think that's easy, try maintaining the perfect thickness throughout each coil. Too thin, and you'll have a part that can't hold its own against a gentle breeze. Too thick, and you'll end up with something resembling a medieval weapon. This painstaking labor isn't just about the physical act of creation. It's a testament to the social fabric of your community. Potters hold a revered position, not just because they're the ones making sure everyone has something to drink out of, but because they're crafting vessels that serve as both practical items and objects of trade. Your parts are currency, art, and status symbols all rolled into one. They might even find their way onto an altar, given as offerings to appease the gods or curry favor with neighboring villages. Now that's what you call multitasking. Speaking of social status, being a potter in your village isn't just a job, it's a calling. While not everyone can claim this craft, those who do are seen as essential to the economic and cultural vitality of the community. Your work is literally and figuratively the foundation of trade networks that crisscross the region like ancient highways. And let's face it, when it comes to bartering, a well-crafted part can speak volumes more than a basket of corn. Imagine being part of a lineage where your skills are passed down like family heirlooms, with each generation adding their own flair to the mix. You're not just following a tradition, you're part of an evolving art form that reflects the changing tides of culture and commerce. Each part you make is a brushstroke on the canvas of history, a small yet significant piece of a much larger puzzle. But let's not get too carried away with the romance of it all. The truth is, being a potter is grueling work, and there are days when the clay just won't cooperate, when your hands are more blisters than skin, and when you wonder if it would be easier to just trade your craft for a quieter life. Yet, it's precisely this mix of hardship and artistry that makes your role so crucial. You're shaping not just clay, but the very essence of your community's identity. As the sun dips below the horizon and the day's toil comes to an end, you can't help but admire the fruits of your labor. Each part, bowl and cup, is a testament to your resilience and skill, a tangible link to the past and a promise to the future. Tomorrow, you'll do it all over again, because in this world, the grind never stops, and neither does the legacy you're building, one coil at a time. As the sun peeks over the horizon like a nosy neighbor, you know that while shaping the clay was a workout worthy of its own fitness regime, the real test is about to begin. Enter the firing process, where your carefully crafted parts meet their fiery destiny. It's a bit like a medieval trial by fire, only your parts are on the stand, and their fate is sealed with flames rather than a judge's gavel. Now, let's talk about these ancient kilns and open pit fires, because why settle for a straightforward oven when you can have a bonfire that makes a rock concert look tame? First off, you'll need an open space, preferably one that won't catch the village on fire. Safety first, right? The villagers gather around, turning this into a communal event. It's less about getting the job done and more like the ancient Mesoamerican equivalent of a block party. Now, if you're picturing a kiln as a cozy little brick igloo, think again. In this world, kilns are more like ambitious sandcastles. You build them out of mud and clay, and they're anything but high-tech. Meanwhile, open pit fires are exactly what they sound like, large pits lined with stones or bricks, where parts are stacked with the precision of a Jenga game. This is where your inner control freak gets to shine, because if you don't manage the fire properly, your parts could end up as nothing more than a pile of shards, or worse, a cautionary tale for future generations. Firing is a delicate dance of temperature control. Too hot, and your parts could crack faster than a poorly executed joke at a comedy club. Too cold, and they won't be durable enough to hold water, let alone stand the test of time. We're talking about temperatures reaching up to 900 degrees Celsius, and yes, that's as hot as it sounds. You've got to maintain that heat for several hours, all while dodging the smoke and embers like an ancient firefighter. And let's not forget the environmental impact. Before you roll your eyes and think, oh, not another eco-lecture, here's the deal. The wood needed for these fires doesn't just grow on trees. Oh, wait, it does, but that's the point. Deforestation is a real concern, even back then. Every firing session means venturing further into the forest, and sometimes that leads to a little tension with neighboring villages who prefer their trees standing. Thank you very much. But here's the kicker. The communal aspect of these firings is what truly elevates the experience. This is where the village comes together, not just to watch your parts turn into something more than mud, but to socialize, trade stories, and maybe even strike a deal or two. Imagine a marketplace where the currency is laughter and the goods are stories as much as they are actual objects. The firing process is both a spectacle and a social event, where the flames light up not just the parts, but the very ties that bind the community. And why is this communal aspect so important, you ask? Well, in a world where isolation could mean the difference between survival and obscurity, these gatherings reinforce social bonds. They're a reminder that no one is in this alone, and that the strength of the community lies in its unity. It's like the ancient version of a neighborhood watch, only with more fire and less suspicion. But let's not sugarcoat it. There's always the risk of failure. If a firing goes wrong, it's not just a personal setback. It's a hit to the village's economy. Parts are traded far and wide, and a bad batch could mean losing face with trading partners or, worse, the village's reputation taking a nosedive. In this high-stakes game, your craftsmanship isn't just about skill. It's a matter of survival. So, as the flames lap at the edges of your kiln and the villagers gather with bated breath, you realize you're not just firing parts. You're firing hopes, ambitions, and the collective future of your community. Each successful part is a testament to your skill, a tangible piece of art that carries the weight of history and the promise of what's to come. It's not just about making ends meet. It's about creating a legacy that will stand the test of time, or at least until the next firing. The day isn't over yet, and there's still much to do. But for now, as you watch the parts glow in the heart of the fire, you take a moment to appreciate the spectacle. This is more than just a craft. It's an art form, a social glue, and a testament to human ingenuity. And as you stand there, feeling the heat on your face and hope in your heart, you know that tomorrow you'll do it all over again. Because in this world, the fire never truly goes out, and neither does the drive to create something that matters. As the embers cool and the parts emerge unscathed from their fiery trial, you might think the day's work is winding down. But hold your horses, or should I say, jaguars, because now comes the part where function meets flair, decoration. This isn't some slapdash paint job. It's a meticulous process that turns your part into a canvas of cultural expression. Let's dive into the vibrant world of Mesoamerican artistry. Imagine your part as a blank slate, a vessel not just for corn or water, but for stories and symbols. This is where natural pigments enter the scene, turning earth tones into vivid narratives. Forget your high-tech paint kits. Here, you're wielding hues sourced from the land itself. Red comes from hematite, a mineral that gives the clay a rich, rusted hue. Meanwhile, black is derived from the humble char of burned wood or obsidian, echoing the shadows of the jungle. And then there's white, often chalk or kaolin, adding a stark contrast that could make even a minimalist designer's heart flutter. Now, let's talk tools. While modern artists might reach for a fine-tipped brush, you're going au natural. That means brushes fashioned from yucca leaves or agave fibers, tools as simple as they are effective. The result? Intricate designs that would make even the most seasoned tattoo artist nod in respect. These aren't just aesthetic choices, mind you. They're reflections of societal values, religious beliefs, and even political propaganda. Each symbol carries weight, each line a connection to the divine or a nod to the ruler's might. Take, for instance, the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl. This deity/cultural icon slithers across parts, embodying everything from fertility to wisdom. It's the Mesoamerican version of a celebrity endorsement, except instead of a sneaker line, you're promoting divine favor. Or consider the maize guard, a staple both on your plate and in your iconography. These symbols transform your parts from mere containers into cultural artifacts, speaking volumes about the priorities and beliefs of your people. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality is, these designs are as much about survival as they are about storytelling. A part adorned with symbols of abundance and fertility might just be the thing to tip the scales in a trade negotiation. In fact, certain designs could increase a part's value significantly, making them more than just pretty faces. They are economic assets. You're not just an artist. You're a strategic player in the village's economic game. And oh, the pressure. One slip of the hand, one misdrawn line, and you're not just facing a cosmetic issue. You're risking the part's entire value. Talk about stakes higher than a jaguar's leap. Your reputation rides on the precision of your strokes, and in a world where word of mouth is the Yelp review of the day, a bad review can spread faster than a wildfire. There's no room for error when every part is a potential masterpiece and a crucial trade commodity. Yet, despite the tension, there's an undeniable joy in this process. As you lay down each line, you're not just working with clay and pigment, you're weaving yourself into the fabric of your culture. Each design is a conversation with the past and a message to the future. Your parts could end up in a neighboring village, or perhaps centuries later, unearthed by an archaeologist who marvels at your handiwork. It's a legacy, etched in clay, that transcends time. Now let's debunk a myth or two. You might think every part was a painstaking work of art, a masterpiece in miniature. But in truth, not every piece was adorned with divine imagery or intricate patterns. Everyday parts were often left plain, functional above all else. The decorated ones, they were the high-end models, the luxury goods of their time. So, if you were expecting each part to be a Sistine Chapel of ceramics, think again. The reality was a mix of the mundane and the magnificent, a testament to both practicality and creativity. As the sun dips lower and the evening breeze whispers through the village, you realize the role you play isn't just about utility or aesthetics. It's about bridging the gap between the earthly and the ethereal. Your hands tell stories as old as the hills, speaking in a language of lines and colors that resonate through generations. You're not just a potter, you're a historian, a storyteller, and an artist, carving your niche in the grand mosaic of Mesoamerican culture. But hold onto your brushes, because the day isn't over yet. As the shadows lengthen, the village gathers to admire the newly decorated parts, sharing stories of their creation and the tales they tell. It's a moment of communal pride, a celebration of skill and tradition. And as you stand there, surrounded by friends and family, you know that tomorrow will bring new challenges and new stories to tell. But for now, you bask in the glow of shared history and shared purpose, knowing that each part is more than just clay and pigment. It's a testament to the enduring spirit of your people. As the village buzzes with life, and the newly decorated parts glint in the evening light, it's time to appreciate the fruits of your labor. You're not just looking at clay containers, you're witnessing the backbone of everyday life. From the humble storage jar to the ceremonial vessel, these parts are as diverse as a modern-day supermarket aisle, each with a role as vital as the next. Take the storage jars, for example, real workhorses of the kitchen. These aren't just any old containers. They're the ancient Mesoamerican equivalent of Tupperware, minus the plastic but with far more style. They hold everything from water to maize, the staple that keeps your village ticking. And let's not forget the cacao beans, the precious currency of the region. Yep, before chocolate was a sweet treat, it was cold, hard cash. Imagine if your wallet was half as tasty. Now, while these storage jars are all about practicality, the ceremonial vessels are where things get a bit fancy. These are the red carpet celebrities of the pottery world, used in religious rituals, offerings, and feasts. They're adorned with elaborate designs that could make a Renaissance painter weep, and they serve a dual purpose. Not only do they appease the gods, but they also impress the neighbors. Because what's a community gathering without a little divine intervention and some friendly competition? But let's cut through the romanticized imagery and face the facts. Pottery wasn't just an art, it was a survival tool. A part that could withstand the test of time, and the occasional human error was worth its weight in gold. Archaeologists estimate that a well-made part had a lifespan of 10 to 20 years, but a shardy one. It'd be lucky to see the end of the week. And unlike today's throwaway culture, a broken part wasn't just trash. It was ground down and reused as temper, giving it a second life. Talk about sustainability before it was cool. As the villagers mill about, chatting and laughing, it's clear that pottery is more than just a craft. It's a cornerstone of the community. These vessels tell stories, not just through their designs, but through their very existence. They're a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of your ancestors, who figured out how to turn mud into an indispensable part of daily life. And here's where we bust another myth. While we often imagine ancient societies as static, trapped in a bygone era, the reality is they were constantly innovating, adapting, and improving their methods. The evolution of pottery techniques is proof of that. And here's the kicker. These parts aren't just relics of the past. They offer a tangible connection to history, a glimpse into the lives of those who came before us. They help historians piece together the past, filling in the gaps left by time. You see, while written records can tell us what happened, pottery can show us how people lived, what they valued, and even what they ate. It's like a time capsule that speaks volumes without uttering a word. This legacy of Mesoamerican pottery continues to influence contemporary art forms, too. Modern potters draw inspiration from these ancient designs, incorporating them into their work as a homage to the past. It's a reminder that while times change, the essence of creativity and human expression remains constant. And isn't that the real magic of pottery? It's both a product of its time and a timeless art form, bridging the gap between the ancient and the modern. As the night deepens and the village slowly quiets down, you can't help but reflect on the day's work. You've shaped more than just clay. You've contributed to a legacy that spans centuries. And while tomorrow will bring new challenges and opportunities, tonight you're part of something bigger, a community bound by a shared history and a shared future. So, as you lay your tools down and watch the stars twinkle above, you realize that the role of a potter is much like the parts you've created, multifaceted, essential, and enduring. It's not just about making ends meet. It's about creating connections between people, between past and present, and between earth and art. It's about leaving a mark, one that will be felt long after the last part has cooled and the last story has been told. And as you drift off to sleep, lulled by the gentle hum of the village and the whispers of history, you can't help but smile. Because in this world, where every part is a piece of a grander tapestry, you've found your place, your purpose, and your legacy. And that's a story worth telling, one part at a time.